Avi Afrique. To our VIP guests, special guests, honored speakers, delegates, and all ATNS staff. And also a special welcome to the ATNS chairman, the board of directors, and the chief executive officer. Welcome to day 2 of our 9th Avi Afrique Innovation Summit. I'm delighted to be your host for this great event, which is for the very first time held virtually. The Avi Afrique Innovation Summit is a uniquely African gathering providing a platform for collaboration between African air navigation service providers, organizations, communities, as well as global counterparts, to explore new avenues and technologies that enhance the field of aviation as well as aviation safety. My name is Khomotso Molifi. I'm the pool manager for approach services at OR Tambo International Airport and a air traffic controller by profession. I'm not alone. With me is Nogwanda Fakude, a systems engineer at ATNS, specializing in surveillance system infrastructure development. Yesterday was indeed a day of transformative thinking, knowledge sharing, innovation, and robust discussion from leaders and experts in aviation industry across all spheres. We were able to see and appreciate how in a rapidly evolving technological era, it is essential to assess and adequately protect our aviation systems from cyber attacks. It also was important for us to understand the level of risk imposed by evolution into new future technologies and be able to explore fitting mitigations as we gravitate, remembering that digitization essentially means cyber tech. During these tough economic times, we've seen how, as a safety critical industry, we could tap into the advantages brought by innovative thinking and collaboration. The bedrock for innovation is proper information data analysis and effective knowledge management. We have to be agile as a safety industry, take up the limited opportunities and rebuild post the COVID pandemic for a high-tech future. Today will be no different, as we have an exciting program ahead of us with knowledgeable guests, speakers, experts, and interactive discussions. Let's go through a few housekeeping rules before we get into the discussions. If I could remind all of our special guests to continue engaging with us and to leave comments and questions in the message chat box on the Teams platform. We also encourage you to comment and share your thoughts on our various social media platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, using the hashtag AviAfrique2021 through the day. Our handle is at ATNSSA on all platforms. The event is streamed live on the ATNS YouTube page. Please leave comments in the message section. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and connect with ATNS. 3 exciting guests are lined up to discuss various topics today. We are looking forward to great presentations on strategic collaboration and partnership, focus on future environment and agility in the ever-transforming aviation industry. Before we engage our speakers in a panel discussion, we'll take a short 15-minute break at 13:45 Central African Time. On that note, help me welcome ATNS Executive Commercial Services, Mr. Thabani Mieza. Mr. Mieza, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And to our guest speaker, Ms. Bonnie Dibate, Regional Director of Kenzo, to the chairman of the ATNS board members, to the speakers and the panelists for today, to our guests, the delegates, colleagues, allow me to welcome you to day 2 of the 2021 Avi Afrique, where we are changing aviation's DNA for tomorrow's reality. Since 2012, ATNS, working with partners, we have hosted this strategic, prestigious event And of course, in 2020, there were challenges with the global pandemic. Our CEO yesterday took us down memory lane and highlighted some of the great thinking and foresight of our guest speakers, our panelists. Not only that, but also the organizers that saw it fit and necessary to initiate this event. On reflecting on what our CEO said, there's one key message that comes out for me. Collaboration and how that will contribute to our success, not just in aviation, but across industries, across countries, across regions, and mainly for this beautiful continent of ours, Africa. He also highlighted how valuable collaboration has been for us. He spoke to our relationship with SANZA on space weather, GNSS. May I add also our relationship with the CSIR on issues like passive radar and others. We also had an address from Mr. Patrick Mana of Eurocontrol, who reminded us that digitization is critical, but it also brings new risks in our environment. That as we develop, we end up with a mix of different systems, and there is where we become more vulnerable. ATM systems are not immune, he said, but it is our responsibility as a whole to protect ourselves, to protect our systems, and to protect our business and industry. Mr. Vui Sendenze spoke to us about what he calls the data lake. The fact that we need to analyze and harness for decision making, which will enable us to run better businesses in the future. He also said that data and analysis are there to support decision making, but it does not replace decision making. For me, that was critical. He spoke about the need for us to align people, systems, processes to make sure that we work in a coordinated fashion while balancing executive support and operational needs. And if you take that balancing, it was also Mr. Patrick Mana who spoke about some of the conflict that takes place between executive support and operational leads, because our need for data sometimes and data analysis is for different reasons. Mr. Biko Mananga from CSIR, one of our partners, spoke to us about innovation. He actually emphasized that manufacturing drives development. No other nation can develop without it. He spoke to the fact that we need to find anchor industries. The fact that, and this is really my interpretation, aviation in South Africa cannot do it alone. Defense and defense aeronautical industries need to come together for us to succeed. He spoke about the issues of value chain approach, and he spoke about capacitating the system. This is really talking to our government, mentioning areas of enabling environment, appropriate funding, SMME incubation, and focus on STEM subject. And I'm very happy to say that there's a lot of work happening at ATNS in supporting the development of STEM subjects. And then he spoke about interdepartmental coordination, because we cannot afford to work in silos. So as program director said, lots of ground was covered yesterday. And I think we can look forward to today to more deep discussion as we tackle key issues on collaboration and partnerships, taking a crystal ball into the future, and how the need for agility will make us future fit as we move forward. So ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming you back for day 2, I look forward to the discussions. and the very fact that we also look forward to your contributions. So in doing this, let me go back to where we started. Allow me to welcome our CEO, Mr. Sangweni, Mr. Dumisani Sangweni, to say a few words, but also to introduce our keynote speaker. Mr. Sangweni, you started yesterday, sir, and I'm now handing over back to you to start us off again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mieza, for the introduction. And yes, I did start us off yesterday, but my role today is slightly different in that you have mentioned an introduction of our keynote speaker. But before I do that, sir and Master of Ceremonies, allow me to acknowledge once again CEOs, Director Generals, Heads of Departments, Regional Directors, Executives, and other distinguished guests present today. Special acknowledgement, as you have done, to Ms. Boni Dibate, our Regional Director for Council, in our midst, our distinguished speakers, second lineup today, members, the media, delegates in the summit, and colleagues. Good afternoon again for the second day. You have reflected very well, Mr. Mieza, on the events of yesterday. We heard, as you said, from leaders in industry, subject matter experts in all spheres, speaking innovation. We heard very exciting and enthralling presentations around protection of our CNS IT systems from cyber attacks from Mr. Nimase, Mr. Mana, and Mr. Biko, as you have highlighted. A very interesting and engaging discussions. In kicking off today, I think it's only correct that I welcome the chairman and also the ATNS board in its entirety and extend a warm welcome to those board members that are with us today on this virtual platform. We are privileged at ATNS to have a very skilled and committed board comprising members from various disciplines in training and varying experience and educational backgrounds. This complement and hybrid of skills lends very well to the effective functioning of the board in its role of oversight of the entity. Apart from the normal financial and performance statutory oversight responsibilities they have and execute quite diligently, they have been very instrumental in the oversight of management's organizational response in the past 16 months to the COVID-19 pandemic and our general response plan in all aspects, offering a solid pillar of support in several areas, but not limited to ensuring rationalization of ATNS's cost base to ensure financial sustainability, supporting the development of the ATNS growth strategy in its commercial business endeavors and within the context of business modernization and innovation, and assisting in high-level stakeholder management and the quality of stakeholder relationships, including reviewing the organization's risk profile and supporting the development of an ethics and management strategy. And to this, we are quite thankful, especially in this difficult time, as I covered yesterday, in which it has been a question of weathering a very difficult environment externally and also internally, given the challenges that COVID-19 has presented. Before I introduce the chairman, I must make mention of those board members present with us on this virtual platform, and I welcome Captain Jane Trembach, a member of the Business Research and Operations Development Committee, the Audit and Risk Committee, and other committees. I welcome also Mr. Zenzele Mieza, a member, the chairperson of the Business Research and Operational Development Committee, and a member of several other committees. Welcoming also Mr. Thomas Hokolo, a member of the Audit and Risk, Social and Ethics Committee, Human Resource Committee, and other committees. And lastly, but not least, Mr. Suleiman Badat, chairperson of the Audit and Risk Committee and member of other committees. Mr. Chairman, before you take the stage, allow me to sing your praises, the form of your bio. To those who are not aware, Mr. Simpiwe Tobela, the ATNS board chairman, was appointed as chairperson of the board of directors of Air Traffic and Navigation Services, ATNS, in 2018. He is also the chairperson of the board of directors of Media, Information and Communication Technology Service, Education and Training Authority, CETA, MICT, CETA, since 2020. He has served as a non-executive director at the Eastern Cape Development Corporation, ECDC, from 2014 until 2020. He was recently appointed as a member of the Board of Directors of Universal Access Agency of South Africa, UASA, where he chairs the Audit and Risk Committee. Further, he has been appointed to serve as Mwaka T Estate. Mr. Tobela has more than 10 years' experience in governance. During this time, he has served on various subcommittees. Academically, he holds a master's degree in town and regional planning, and he is currently completing a PhD in urban and regional planning with the University of the Free State. With this, please allow me to welcome our chairman to address. Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Sangweni, for the kind words of introduction. And let me thank you so much at a personal level for the effort that you are currently putting as a CEO at ATNS. And unfortunately, you had to come in at this difficult time of the coronavirus pandemic. But I can say without any fear of contradiction that I am certainly proud of the effort that you've made and leadership that you've provided to your colleagues and the rest of management. And that is very much appreciated. And let me first just do what I don't necessarily like doing when you are about to speak. And I would start by offering an apology. And an apology for yesterday's mishap around connections. And I should have spoken yesterday. And unfortunately, we could not get around the technical glitches that we had. But here we are now, and this owes to what we call now new normal that we are facing as the world. And as it has been said, this is the first time we host this August event at the virtual platform like we are doing today. I don't intend to take long, members. I will be brief. Noting that there are aspects of subject matters that we're dealing with, and there are more experienced people that are going to share ideas with us in this platform. And therefore, mine is just to welcome you, which I should have done yesterday, and raise a few questions that probably this platform has to engage with going forward. Before I do that, I must also just acknowledge the board members that have made it to join this event, and thank them for the support that they provide to me as a chairperson, and also the support that they provide to the entire management and the organization at large. And their efforts are indeed acknowledged. I confirm that what the CEO was saying, that we've got a very skilled board that is very committed to the cause of the air traffic and navigation services as an organization. I must welcome all the participants and thank all the participants that have already spoken and participated yesterday. And I also would like to acknowledge specific persons that are here joining us in this session. And I'll start with Ms. Boni Dibate from Kenzo, Africa region, and also Patrick Mana, Cyber Security Program Manager at Eurocontrol, Frank Ogochuko, Chief Technology Strategist at Debbie Mashal, and Mr. Biko Managa, Aeronautics Systems Impact Manager at CSRR, and our own Mabitse Lakhodi and Mr. Sivuise Nzenze, who are both from ATNS. And also, lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Miena Laisko, I hope I pronounced that right, from Move Beyond Consulting. And also all other participants are indeed acknowledged, and we may not be able to complete the whole list of the luminaries that are in this session. Just starting off from the blocks is the recent Council session that called for greater industry unity in the face of the pandemic that has hit the entire aviation industry in the world. The airlines, airports, and ANSPs have been impacted, and the vital supply chain that supports the airline in the aviation industry has also been impacted. I'd also like to add, amongst those that have been impacted by this, the regulatory bodies that we sometimes not consider, but I think they're very important to be also acknowledged, that they also are not immune from the impact that the pandemic has visited on us. To their credit, the NSPs have implemented a myriad of cost-cutting measures that unfortunately included the reducing of staff members and cutting pay at some instances, postponing long-term investment projects in some cases, which are vital for our operations in our space. And they have done so while continuing to fulfill their role as critical national infrastructure, keeping the skies open and safe, no matter what the traffic levels are. And that, to me, has been a very important thing that we should never forget, and we must take our hats off for those that are at the cold face of delivering this important service of keeping our skies safe, even during the difficult times. A recent survey of Kenzo members regarding COVID-19 impact, how it has impacted, has found that there is 97% of ANSPs that had made cuts to reduce their operating costs, with 86% of ANSPs also cutting capital expenditure between 2020 and 2021. And this is anticipated to be enduring beyond 2021 as we face the daunting challenge of recovery and sustaining that recovery going forward. The survey also found that the ANSPs have absorbed the impact of reducing revenues in a variety of ways, including 73% of ANSPs being forced to cover the cost continuing operations by acquiring debt. This is a matter that we had not foreseen that we would be at this stage prior to March 2020. But we find ourselves having to go to markets and raise a debt because revenue is not coming, and the revenue for ANSPs is directly linked to the aviation industry as a whole, how it is performing. But not that only. The aviation industry is also linked to the economies, and we know the impact of the COVID-19, that it paralyzed every sector of livelihood in different countries across the world. This has been a momentous test of resilience of ANSPs, and even more to the small ANSPs that probably are found in the continent of Africa. This calls on us to examine whether we have the strategies that are required to respond to the challenge that is facing us. It's a question that I believe that the session has to deal with, whether we are prepared enough for external shocks that may come and that were not foreseen. The case in point, COVID-19, by February 2020, nobody ever even anticipated that this would happen. But is it the only one? What else should we be anticipating? And how should we prepare ourselves? And it's very important for this session to be seized with that discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic led to a change in the behavior of passengers that is influenced by travel restrictions and ensuing economic crisis across the globe. This has resulted in a dramatic drop in demand for airline services. According to IATA, passenger air transport measured as revenue per kilometer was down by 90% year on year if you compare it from April to now, and still down by 75% as of August. The near collapse in economic activity and trade affected freight, which was almost 30% lower year on year in April, and it's still about 12% lower as of August. These are figures that are mind-boggling. It tells us that we're still far from being out of the woods yet, and therefore it calls some thinking out of the box, and probably somebody would say it calls some revolutionary thinking on how do we prepare ourselves for the unforeseen. The impact of the COVID-19 crisis removed more than 1 billion passengers for the whole year of 2020, compared to the projected baseline pre-COVID-19 period. This is representing a decline of about 64.6% of the global passenger traffic. Compared to the 2019 level, the decline is recorded at 63.3%. This is massive a decline, which should worry us and should concern us. And our concern should be, what is our contribution as an industry in ensuring that we deal and face up with the pandemic that has hit us, and probably what else could happen that we should be preempting. So if we have to see a sustained and resilient aviation industry. Probably I must hasten to make a point here. The point that I would like to make is what is called new normal. Probably it's something that I'll talk about even later towards the conclusion of this contribution. Is that this new normal, I still believe that we are almost romanticizing the problem that we are faced with as the entire globe. Human contact, it is difficult and probably not it's not sustainable that we would prevent human contact in our functioning as human beings. And therefore, the aviation industry becomes central to that. So our role in ensuring that we reduce and eradicate the coronavirus and any other unforeseen impact is central. We cannot be spectators, and therefore we should view this new normal as something of a temporal measure for as long as we continue to find means and ways of dealing with this pandemic that is facing us. The airline industry is staring a similar fate with significant decline in passenger numbers. In such turbulent times, it's vitally important that industry players are agile and holistic at risk management, including accounting risk in parallel with direct economic risk. We saw some of the airlines going through a tumultuous period due to the impact of the pandemic. Some are at a recovery state, albeit at a very modest rate due to regulatory, financial, and economic factors. This calls for a strengthened collaboration in the entire value chain of the aviation sector. For international air travel to get back on its feet, there must be a confidence that the pandemic is under control on a global level and that it is safe to travel until such time when an effective solution is found. It is expected that any recovery will occur at a very measured pace. Countries and states should impose specific limitations for international passengers, including requiring before boarding, such as requirements before boarding, such as mandatory screenings and COVID-19 test certificates. We must support this. Some people have characterized the certificates as probably discriminatory, particularly that there are some who are not in favor of the COVID-19 vaccine. But I think it's going to be very important that whilst we respect the individual human rights for those who do not want to take the vaccine, but it is important to understand that those who do not want to take vaccines are also exposing those who take vaccine but are in interaction with those that are not taking the vaccine. And it does not help the program of trying to contain the virus. And therefore, the issue of the certificates, in my view, has to be supported if we have to get the economies and the aviation industry back on its feet. Regardless of the measures adopted in a hope for recovery, experts in the air transport industry are expecting the COVID-19 outbreak and impact on aviation to be drawn out to much longer than we can see at the moment. This means we are still facing headwinds and turbulence ahead. Kenzo, in November 2020, makes a point about the resilience of ANSPs, and I quote what you'd find in the Kenzo website. It reads as follows: though there is much talk of a new normal, existing best practice will still be vitally important for the industry to deal with the anticipated traffic levels that we are looking for. Close quote. We therefore have to ask the question about the resilience of the ANSPs across the globe. In the context of the Avi Afrique session that is continuing now, which is about innovation, a question must be asked regarding the business models and modernization models that we have to adopt that would ensure safety, efficiency, and managing the running cost of providing ATM services. What new technologies must be looked at, and at what cost should those technologies be coming? The ATNS Avi Afrique Innovation Summit was launched in 2012. Its primary focus was largely on innovation. It has been held annually during October, which is also known as the Transport Month in South Africa. The summit is a platform for integrated approach to innovation, research, and development within the aviation sector. South African state-owned entities such as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, Academy of Science of South Africa, ASIF, DENEL, South African National Space Agency, South African Weather Services, Airports Company of South Africa, Civil Aviation Authority, the Technology Innovation Agency, and national departments, particularly transport, and the Air Force are some of the major role players that are participating in the summit. ATNS is committed to joining the digital revolution by encouraging strategies and strategic innovative collaborations needed to propel the new age of evolution forward. The company investment in the global air transport system includes a two-pronged process, namely the ideation and production of commercially viable products and services. This is where whilst we look at digitization, the issue of the cybersecurity, and I've seen in the program that there are aspects to take us through that part, that it is very important whilst you go digital, but the risks also are mounting on the other side to attack that very development of digitalization. And therefore, it's important that we must spend time to look into that. What are the risks that we face as we go digital? There is an increase in cooperation and partnerships with ANSPs and Civil Aviation Authority organizations, especially those within the continent. The summit regularly invites delegates from all the countries, even those that are affiliated to ASECNA. And we are very proud to have this working relationship with ASECNA as partners in the aviation in the context of a single African sky. International aviation equipment manufacturing companies, also known as OEMs, Eurocontrol, Telemat, AMI, and others, the Netherlands Aerospace Center and Airbus Defence and Space SA have over the years contributed immensely in the summit innovation discussions, and that is highly appreciated. Strong partnerships with leading South African universities, namely University of Pretoria, the University of South Africa, University of Johannesburg, Witwatersrand, Stellenbosch, and the Da Vinci Institute have been formed. This has resulted in very strong research and development capabilities. In terms of youth, in order for us to stimulate innovation among young people, ATNS has partnered with ESCOM and Expo for young scientists. But it doesn't end there. The board of ATNS has taken a decision to support through our CSR programs to support schools at lower levels to encourage young learners to take up science and mathematics, as these are critical for the development of aviation, amongst others. And therefore, this is one of the things that we are proud of as ATNS. We also have built strategic partnerships with the likes of TIA and SANSA, which are agencies of the Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, and are in ongoing partnership to enhance technology innovation and excellence within the traffic management environment. ATNS and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, signed a memorandum of understanding to collaborate and partner in development of South Africa multi-static passive radar technology. This is one of the very fundamental agreements and partnerships that we have built that we hope to maintain and sustain going forward. We have also partnered with the global aviation bodies such as KENZO, such as ICAO and IATA. These organizations have made aviation experts readily available during the summit to contribute towards air safety and related solutions. We also have a responsibility to promote SMMEs in the process through opportunities to exhibit at the summit in the past 7 years. ATNS has afforded over 100 SMMEs to showcase their products and services to local and foreign delegates. A number of women businesses such as Basadiba Itusa Consultants, Lee D, Equan, and Tip Focus Holding have been working closely with ATNS and have been a strong feature at the summit. This we are proud of in the context of affirming women and in business and innovation in particular. The summit's primary objective is to assist innovators to turn their innovation into commercially viable products and services for aviation. Winners of the prestigious Avi Afrique Awards have been provided with funding to expand their products and services. In this regard, I believe that there are a number of innovations and innovators that are working on various solutions. The challenge that we need to confront is whether we have been able to support some of these innovators and innovations to a full product development and commercialization. That's a question that we need to engage with so that we do not have a situation where services and products are developed, but we are unable to see them to fruition. This is a very important aspect of the Avi Afrique, and it has to remain relevant into the future. We must position this platform as an arena where innovation is nurtured and supported to a point of being a fully developed product or service. Time becomes very important in doing this because the change that is happening in the world is happening at a breakneck speed. And therefore, we should be conscious when these innovators are presenting solutions and say, how do we support and make sure that we do not waste time in up to a point these innovations become obsolete. Lastly, I believe that the long-standing debate about the consolidation of ANSPs needs to be confronted. The COVID-19 has presented an opportunity for relooking into this debate. This ATM environment will be changing drastically into the future, and we must anticipate such a change and be prepared for it. Otherwise, we will see the demise of the aviation industry, which would be difficult to resuscitate if we do not take precautionary measures to have this discussion and other related matters in the aviation space in view of the unforeseen risks that we continue to confront on an ongoing basis. With this, I indeed wish the speakers and the participants all the success beyond this discussion and out there on a daily basis, that we have to live what we discuss in these platforms so that we see what contribution we are making in the innovation in the context of the aviation industry. With that, thank you so much, Program Director. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, ATNS Board Chairperson, Mr. Tobela. The aviation industry has heavily been hit by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic indeed, and we continue to feel the effects even today. This indeed calls for strengthened collaboration, innovative and decisive thinking across all spheres of industry. We appreciate your thoughts and leadership insights. ATNS has really played a critical role in skills development through our various programs. Siyabulela. Let me remind our guests to continue to interact with us on social media platforms using hashtag Avi Afrique 2021. Help me please welcome the Kenzo Africa Regional Director as our guest speaker, Ms. Boni Dibate. Ms. Boni Dibate holds a BA degree in Social Sciences and a Master's of Sciences degree in Clinical Psychology from the Medical University of South Africa. She also obtained the Top Management Program for Public Enterprises in South Africa, a certificate at the National University of Singapore, a Senior Executive Development Program certificate from Harvard Wits Business School, Airline Management Integration Program certification from IATA Aviation Training and Development Institute in Singapore, and a Creative Airline Alliance and Strategic Partnership certificate from Amman, Jordan. Ms. Dibate has obtained a diploma in international coaching from Newfield Network Boulder in the USA, and a member of IODSA. She held positions as an Executive Human Resources Manager at Transwerk, Chief Executive Officer of both Ashland Park Center of Excellence and South African Expressways, Group Executive Manager Support Services at Transtel, Chief Operation Officer and Executive Manager Service Delivery at Air Traffic Navigation Services, and currently the Kenzo Regional Director, Africa Affairs. Having sat at an array of boards, has been the chairperson of Tourism Business Council of South Africa, Eastgate Airport, president of the Business Women Association, a board member, and was a council member of the University of Pretoria, and one of the directors of Dark Fiber Africa, DFA, and South African Expressways, where she held the position of being the chairperson of the Ethics and Transformational Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Ms. Bonnie Dibate. I'm so sorry, Ms. Dibate. Let's wait until your mic is unmuted. You were muted for a while there. Apologies.
Okay, it's fine now. Hey. Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. For that introduction. You sometimes wonder whether is this talking about you when you get introduced like that, especially when it's read from the CV. But thank you so much. Appreciate it. Board of ATNS, the chairman of ATNS, CEO and executives of ATNS, all industry leaders, all delegates, ATNSs, good afternoon to you all today. First and foremost, Kenzo would like to thank ATNS for inviting us to this great groundbreaking initiative, which has been in existence since 2012. The global economy entered into a recession in 2020 as a result of COVID-19. Researchers say economic activity is not likely to recover to pre-COVID-19 until some say 2023 and some say 2025. The spread of COVID changed the entire aviation industry, posing a serious challenge to airlines, airports, and air navigation service providers. Subsequently, lockdown restrictions had a huge impact on global economies and Africa, and this has resulted in the worst decline since 1913 depression. My mother keeps on telling me about that flu that happened in 1913. Wide range of unemployment globally and in Africa. In the long term, however, the pandemic could help catalyze investments in new technologies and radically reshape all industries, including the aviation industry. And this is where innovation is required. The Civil Air Navigation Services Organization is the global voice of air traffic management. Kenzo members support almost 90% of the world air traffic and represent leading providers of technologies and services to the industry. Members share information and develop new policies with the ultimate aim of improving air navigation services. This means innovation is central to all of Kenzo's work. As Kenzo, we articulate a promise to our members and ATM industry stakeholders. We need to be authentic and consistent in everything we do. We have an opportunity to take more of a leadership role and to influence the wider debate on key issues to become a catalyst for the way airspace is designed and managed in the future. We think big. When we speak, people listen. We create value. We embrace collaboration. We act responsibly, and we strive for the extraordinary. To that effect, Kenzo supports innovation in the industry. Our 3 work groups comprising of safety, operations, strategy, and integration, as well as ICAO affairs, help implement all our programs and initiatives. In particular, the strategy and integration program deals with the strategic, institutional, and regulatory aspects of air navigation services. It provides information and analysis on issues related to the future of air traffic management industry and of Kenzo. Through the strategy and integration program, Kenzo members develop common positions on key issues affecting the ATM industry and coordinate Kenzo's advocacy activities. This program is also responsible for creating tools and guidance material in all areas of ATM governance, human resources, and management to help air navigation service providers become more customer-focused, better performing organizations. This year has been like no other. From a highly volatile traffic picture to a challenge operating environment, air traffic management and the aviation industry itself has had to contend with a lot. This includes safeguarding our liquidity and skills pipelines, pivoting our approach to investment and innovation. Kenzo has been working hard to help its members navigate this, and through advocacy, best practices, guidance, and collaboration, is supporting the industry in taking essential steps on the road to recovery. While ATM is doing everything it can to mitigate the impact of the crisis, the financial stability of the aviation industry is a major concern. Our customers are hurting financially. Reduced traffic is causing reduced revenue for ANSPs and having a knock-on effect in the ATM marketplace. While Kenzo can't influence passengers' demand and therefore recovery, we can still focus on how to further adapt and respond to a changed aviation environment. Planning for a new normal and continuing to build capabilities and capacity for safe and seamless air travel, both now and in the future. And Kenzo has an important role in this, from pursuing our overall mission of transforming ATM performance to helping smooth the process of adaptation. We need to find ways of helping to safeguard resources and skills and boost the efficiency and effectiveness of service provision. In addition, Kenzo and Arion have launched an initiative to produce data-driven insights and analysis on global air traffic. This provides the aviation industry with a single source of information on air transport and the existing and emerging global and regional trends. The Kenzo-Arion partnership is a first-of-its-kind initiative by the ATM industry to share important aviation data with ATM service providers and suppliers, and the aviation industry more widely to assist their decision-making, specifically in innovation processes. The new insights showcase analysis of high-fidelity data on aircraft movements and flight hours worldwide. This enables Kenzo to track global aviation operations and monitor trends over time. This is particularly important when understanding and managing the impact of social or economic developments on the aviation industry. For example, during this COVID-19 pandemic, this data insight shows how the aviation industry has responded and is supporting the flow of essential goods and services. I heard the chairman mentioning that. The ATM report is issued monthly by Kenzo as an analysis of metrics directly relevant to the ATM industry. The report uses high-fidelity global space-based ADS-B air traffic data provided via a partnership with Airlines. The data includes surveillance of all 1090 MHS ADS-B equipped aircraft. While some non-ADS-B equipped aircraft may not be included, the data is appropriate for monitoring of global trends in traffic levels. Looking ahead, Kenzo will continue to identify opportunities to drive the industry forward. Our Director General has urged ICAO to continue its important work on the development of standards and recommended practices, such as for safe integration of unmanned system into airspace, for example. And he pledged Kenzo's continued support on key ICAO safety and operational priorities. Kenzo commended ICAO for the tangible outcomes from their No Country Left Behind initiative and encourages the development of global guidance on the GAMP priorities that is reflective of the industry's current circumstances. In short, we must continue to innovate and create opportunities to share information and collaborate across the aviation industry to find solutions to the challenge we all face. If any industry can, aviation can too. And Kenzo is proud of the amazing work that's being done to safeguard the industry and forge a new normal. We salute ATNS for having driven this initiative, Avi Afrique Innovation, since 2012. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Gracias. Asante sana.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bonidibate. Kenzo has indeed kept us motivated and supported from a strategic viewpoint throughout the pandemic. The programs outlined have been essential in keeping ANSPs and industry at large agile through the difficult times of crisis, helping in getting industry role players prepare for an adequately response to the effects. We are ever confident in the role Kenzo will continue to play in helping us adapt to a new normal, reliable. Valued guests, our speaker lineup will see us introduce Mr. Mabitsi Lekhodi, Mr. Frank Ogochuko, and Dr. Mina Laisko on their various expertise topic. As we look to partner and collaborate in ensuring a sustainable future for the aviation industry and its partners, it is with great pleasure and privilege that I welcome onto the platform Dr. Mina D. Laisko. Dr. Laisko has a rewarding career path from the opportunities of working between academia, industry, and government. She holds a PhD in physics and is the founder and director of Move Beyond Consulting. She has served on a number of national strategic projects, including on Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the Indigenous Launching Capability Business Case for the Department of Science and Innovation. She has done a portfolio of projects across diverse fields, including space science and technology, maritime and renewable energy.
Can you see the slide? Okay, great. Thank you.
She supervises and mentors postgraduate students. Her recent accomplishment has been the United Nations award-winning solution for OpenCL platform. The solution was presented at the 2019 United Nations Youth Climate Summit and at the UN Secretary General's Private Sector Forum. She contributes to the country's special skills development through curriculum development and design and delivery of specialist subject study guides, including in physics, engineering, and maritime, with focus on conceptual understanding, local context, and international technology trends. Dr. Lysko has liaised with local and international networks and partnerships to help deliver on strategic satellite sensor calibration and validation projects and training workshops. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Lysko.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Can I just confirm that everyone can hear me and see the slide?
Everything is okay.
Okay, great. A very good afternoon to everyone tuned in. So, and thank you to ATNS, the organizers, for inviting me to present my thoughts, perspectives today. So, as mentioned, I would look at the strategic collaboration and partnership as industry survival techniques during COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to start by first looking at the value chain. So the aviation sector in itself, it's already an established and excellent example of global collaboration. It is the strategic partnering that allows air transport to connect continents, countries, cultures, and businesses. Africa in itself is a most wondrous continent with its diverse people and resources. Air transport is critical, a mode of connecting the continent to the world and the world to the continent. If we look at the aviation industry and its value chain, so business engagements, tourism, trade, schooling, visiting friends and relatives, and traveling for medical purposes keeps the sector as a critical service. I should also perhaps mention that business travel in itself, it's a channel for international knowledge sharing and knowledge generation. These all make the air transport a critical service to society. So what is it? It's the expediency and the frequency. These are the primary market attractors. So the market drive and critical need sets the core for the civil aviation, military aviation, and let's not forget space transport. Within civil aviation, that's both the private and commercial space, the market is your passengers, the cargo, travel for leisure and sport, and air taxis. With modes of transport really very diverse. There's airplanes, helicopters, blimps, zeppelins, the unmanned aircrafts, hot air balloons, gliders, parachutes, and the list can, I guess, go on. Although I haven't unpacked the military aviation here, we should always remind ourselves that a number of technologies which is thriving in the civil and commercial sector, actually originates from within the military sphere. One standout example is a platform we are using today, connecting remotely via the internet. Military research and development is inherently intertwined to civilian needs, and indeed, interlinkages are needed to maximize on opportunities for economies and strategic goals. If I can just walk us as well through this value chain. So we have the core, and then we have the support and services, both upstream and your downstream. I want to especially perhaps highlight the education and training, which is really a very important feeder in this value chain, and probably something that we all have to look at is how very important it is to preserve the skills that we generate through education and training. In particular, if we look at how long it takes to bring a professional within the environment. 20 years, is it, of schooling, then an additional number of years for university or other higher education, and then it is the in-field experience. So if I was to sum that up, you're looking at plus 40 years to bring up a skill, to nurture a skill. So that skill needs to be looked at as a critical skill to be preserved, and at the same time to continue the wheel rotating to foster education and training. So the value chain drives a lot within the aviation sector, and it is not just the modes of transport, but all of the services and supports that goes with it. If I look at pre-COVID and the trend and projections prior to COVID, we're looking at 2019 thereabout. If we note that Africans make up 12% of the world's population, the African aviation industry accounted for about 3% of passengers globally, just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. But despite the disproportionate activity, the African aviation and tourism sectors contributed over $50 billion to the African economy and supported collectively close to 7 million jobs. Although air transport is generally a smaller share of the GDP, like with the tourism industry, we've seen through the value chain, air transport enables a multitude of other economic activities. The airline industry has actually been seeing persistently poor profits still. But although it creates lucrative value across the aviation value chain, in particular, travel agents, catering, ground services, freight forwarders, and such, they earn relatively high profits. So the poor airline profits, of course, cannot bode well for investors seeking pure monetary gain, and the threat is always there. Capital investment can be diverted to lower risk, higher return sectors. And let's remind ourselves again that we are looking at the pre-COVID. So if countries and airlines are able to overcome barriers pre-COVID and thereby increase the number of passengers, that's the end goal for the lucrative sector, then we will have both direct and indirect positive effects on trade, business travel and tourism, all of the market. If I can also just highlight that the 2012-2019 report shows that airlines accumulated a loss of over $3 billion US. So essentially, pre-COVID, we needed innovation and bold solutions to attract passengers. And some of the things that came out were attracting foreign investment, modernizing infrastructure and operations, attracting and growing skills, and liberalization. For example, where you promote direct flights between countries, intra-Africa, and there's a bigger uptake in terms of visa openness. So you're promoting travel between people in Africa. This was all, again, I should say, pre-COVID. But the pandemic, we all know, has had no mercy, actually, in most industrial sectors across the globe. And this is just the same for airlines. So having said that, so the pandemic has had no mercy for airlines with weaker finances pre-COVID. They require refinancing to ensure their survival. Otherwise, they have to go through merger and acquisition processes or filing for bankruptcy. Further exasperating the concerns about healthy competition to drive down market cost and the efficient use of public resources. Where the low-cost business model could attract a wider passenger base, ticket prices have ramped up. And for a myriad of factors, including having to compensate for costs with fewer flights. So what do we see? Within Africa itself, capacity has dropped to 63% or so. Passengers have also dropped down to around 60 million. I'm looking at just the international. The revenue, $12 billion. That's the loss. That's the loss we have seen within the African sector. And we are likely to reach the pre-COVID air travel demand level, getting these up to unity again by 2023. That's the forecast. However, we are seeing, of course, with the new variants of the COVID virus, countries are being forced to actually take measures rather than now slowly opening up. Russia is a case in state where they are at the end of this month going to have people stop going to work for about a week. The over 60s, I believe, will not be permitted to move about if they are not vaccinated. And this is a similar situation, I think, with Eastern Bloc countries. I'll come back to this. So I've mentioned that we now have, instead of attracting passengers, we now have higher low fares. If we are looking at the low-cost model, there's millions of jobs at risk. And just up to the 18th of October, 16 airlines stopped trading, including 3 from Africa. So, given the issues around the knock-on effects with the COVID pandemic, so obviously collaborative mitigation is needed against the pandemic. I'd like to list a few, and this is from these are from various reports. So, and having read them, they make sense that they can be tailored to the African requirements. So some of the mitigations could be economic stimulus and subsidies to keep employment, loans to reduce at reduced rates and again state guarantees. You could waiver taxes and payment deferrals. You could preserve cash by withholding dividend payments, perhaps. You could tailor measurements for short-term reduction in operation costs, but being mindful of complying with international standards and safety. We have to adjust to health protocols, but with minimal hikes in cost to passenger. Perhaps holding on to expansion plans and sustaining current operations, enabling the environment for private investments. This has been sort of a repeated call in the reports that I've gone through. And then there's the integration of air navigation service providers across Africa. And the list goes on. We could boost implementation of the already brainchild single African air transport markets. I've mentioned this. Promote free movement through visa policies. If we were able to do that, what we see at the bus stations, for example, for travel from South Africa, for instance, into Africa, those stations are pretty much busy and full to capacity. Even more people would want to travel if they were permitted to do so freely through airports. And of course, the more people are traveling, the lower the costs. And it will encourage more travel and then boost the sector. So there are only wins through promoting free movement through visa policies within Africa. Let's not forget the job creation this could promote with the free movement through visas. So going on, if we had a coherent regulatory framework regarding, especially now during the pandemic, with certificate expiry, training certificates, the mutual recognition of certificates, staff licenses, maintenance organizations, and such. Reducing fees and charges. And then we shouldn't forget that people have become scared to travel, and we need to build passenger confidence. So the joint statement by civil aviation bodies, the African Civil Aviation Commission, the Civil Air Navigation Services Organization, the African Airlines Association, the Airports Council International, the International Air Transport Association, all of them, they are looking to, but it could be higher if the new variants of the virus are more contagious. Yet, if we hone in on the data per country, just two out of the 54 countries in Africa have over 40 doses administered per 100 people, with the rest of the continent in need to catch up. But the daily rate of vaccination in Africa does not seem to be ramping up as needed. By this past Monday, just over 5% of Africa was fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and close to 8% partially vaccinated. So Without a significant reprieve on the loss of lives, countries are having little choice but to go into lockdown measures. And that definitely cannot bode well for the movement of people, the aviation sector, and global economies. I've mentioned about Russia and some of the Eastern Bloc countries that are seeing and the demise they are having to go through, but they are seeing daily deaths with higher numbers than at the start of the pandemic. So civil aviation bodies are advocating for expediting the COVID-19 vaccine rollout campaign in Africa. If we look at the example in terms of collaborative efforts, the fight against the Ebola virus, you've had heroic healthcare workers who cared for people during the outbreak and helped contain it. There were also concerted global effort to develop medical countermeasures, such as diagnostic tests to rapidly identify Ebola, therapeutics to reduce deaths among people who get infected, and vaccines that can be administered to people at risk. Essentially, the world came together to prevent outbreaks in Africa. So this too can and should be done with the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to highlight the example of how Ethiopian Airlines have kept business afloat. So they did this through digitization and agile diversification. It allowed the airline to weather the pandemic. How did they do this? They shifted their focus to hotel businesses, cargo, redeploying staff to least affected business units, and through maintenance, repair, and overhaul, just to stay financially stable. Doing that, they had no pay cuts. Jobs were retained. They worked on maintenance, repair, overall to Middle East and African carriers. They have had a critical role in transporting essential medical supplies. They configured passenger aircrafts into freighters to boost cargo capacity, and they chartered repatriation flights. All of this was still within their four-pillar growth strategy. 1, human resource development. 2, a modern fleet. 3, infrastructure development. And 4, technology. We had yesterday talks on innovation, and I'm sure we're going to hear some more today. But I thought I'd include this here. We have to look into the shifts in market. Are people leaning towards, even if there was no COVID, a pandemic tomorrow, would they still choose to have online meetings? Would I still sit in front of my computer speaking to you all? Or would I opt to travel? Would I opt to take a flight and go into a country in Africa outside of the continent to attend these meetings? Or would I, like I say, sit in front of my computer because it is more convenient? Whatever the reason of choice, we have to note that this, of course, is a threat to market share. And we need to think mitigation around that. The other factor, the other thing is with the pandemic, people that like to travel and could travel within their countries have gotten a taste of traveling domestically through, for example, road, rail, transport. So would they want to still stick to this? put their money of travel and holidays into more localized settings. Again, we need to identify the potential threat to market share. So innovation and readiness is needed to take on technology opportunities for new markets as well, having identified threats. So threats are one thing to the market share, but there's also the technology opportunities that's coming through the new markets, such as air taxis, the space of vertical takeoff and landing aircraft is becoming very close to reality. There is a move to green aviation. With green aviation comes the impact investors addressing looking to address sustainable development goals. Then we shouldn't, I touched on this in our value chain slide. We shouldn't forget space tourism. Are we going to lie back and wait for technologies to come into Africa? Or are we going to be ready to adopt technologies and to service technologies? Are we going to come to the forefront with our own technologies, meeting demands of future market types? UAVs, where they could overtake air cargo deliveries. These are all, you could perceive them as upsetting our present state of operations, but they are opportunities. And at a time, just prior to the Wright brothers, before there was no flight, today we could sit in a large aircraft with hundreds of people and move ourselves from one continent and be moved from one continent to another. We could have sensors on these aircrafts, which would help to better build better weather forecasting and climate studies. If we look at where we have come since the Wright brothers, there are going to be upsetting technologies along the way as we move forward. And in Africa, we should consider, are we going to continue waiting for the world to drive us, or are we going to become drivers with the world? So, and all of this can be done through the collaborations and partnerships to get Africa into the skies and out into space. So with that, I'd like to thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lesko. That was a very informative presentation indeed. We have gained so much from this presentation. Thank you, Dr. Lesko. Thank you. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind us that the theme of today, the theme of the summit is "We are re-engineering aviation in these pandemic times." Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guest speakers, I would also like to also remind you that please leave the comments and questions onto our chat box. Continue doing that, and your questions will be addressed accordingly as the program unfolds. Without any further waste of time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, I'm now excited to welcome into our platform Mr. Mabitsi Lehodi, who will present and outline the topic, Focus on the Future Environment. Mr. Lehodi boasts a total of 18 years of experience in the civil aviation industry. His experience spans across the areas of civil aviation operations, aviation policy, legislation and regulation, as well as commercial. Over the years, Mr. Lehodi has played a key role in a number of civil aviation initiatives in South Africa and the AF region. The key one being the So the key one being a leading role in the enhancement of economic regulation framework in South Africa civil aviation, as well as setting up the criteria for establishment of single transport economic regulator. Mr. Lehodi also served in a number of ICAO panels and ad hoc committees where he represented us as South Africa and in the SADC region. Mr. Lehodi holds a master's degree in business leadership, majoring in finance from the University of South Africa. He a graduate school of business leadership and advanced management development program from the University of Pretoria. He holds a BSc in computational physics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, transport management, a certificate from the University of Pretoria, a diploma in civil aviation management from IATA Development Institute, as well as several certificates in civil aviation. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guest speakers, honorable delegates, please welcome Mr. Mabitsi Lehodi.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Can you confirm that I'm audible on your side?
Confirmed, Mr. Mabitsi.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, thanks for this opportunity. I will be engaging you on a topic relating to the forecasting the future of the aviation environment. And my main area of focus will be in the African continent, although in some of the areas I will be touching on other parts of the world and making reference to the South African context. But primarily, this scope covers the largest part of the African continent. I will take you through the background of this topic, and again, we'll also take you through the historical perspective, just a bit of a light touch of where we come from as an industry, what we used to call the conventional approach. I'll also take you through the present perspective, which is the shift, I call it the tipping point, and the highlight of what the future looks like as far as our industry is concerned, and also then conclude by taking you through the future perspective, which is the unconventional approach, as I term it. Now, in terms of our background, I think it goes without doubt that we are sitting in a period that is experiencing fundamental shifts, and that is as a result of the global pandemic. And as a result of that, that calls for action and for us to respond to the shift, which will then also require us to have decisive planning holistically in our industry, which includes airports, airlines, and navigation service providers, governments across different sectors of government, and the tourism sector. Will also be required to prepare and start planning, which will then take us into what the future looks like in our ability to be able to respond to these future trends. One of the key elements there is how will a strategy of a future air navigation organization look like? And I'll give you an example in our current setup within ATNS. We have a strategy that was approved in around December 2019. And it was expected to come into force during the financial year of 2020, which was the 1st of March 2020. Just a few weeks before the strategy came into force, we had coronavirus declared as a global pandemic. In a normal setup, that will derail the strategy. And what we learned in that environment is that we needed to have now a dynamic strategy that will then change. Because at that point, every assumption and every other element that we had assumed or had put in place as part of the strategy changed. So what the future is telling us that we need dynamic strategies in order for us to survive. Over and above that, financial sustainability becomes key. How will a future aviation organization, whether it be an airline, ANSP, or an airport, will then manage its financial sustainability? Health is at the center of the current situation. The impact of the way the current passenger thinks as far as health is concerned. We spoke about social distancing. I've seen recently, going through some of the social media items, one airline published an advert that says, buy a ticket next door. And obviously that means you want to buy the space so that you then have to deal with the fear of having any form of contamination. And that type of mindset and thinking already creates a future passenger from a health perspective. From a health perspective as well, passengers also require to have less contact, contactless machines, contactless checking in. So facilitation of a passenger through an airport will become completely new setup as a result of health. Safety and security, this will emphasize today. How does the safety and the security of our environment look like into the future? From a security point of view, they have emphasized a number of instances as far as cybersecurity is concerned. Another example is that we are moving towards the provision of data through space-based ADSB. And that then says data is the future. But as data is the future, what does that mean as far as safety and security is concerned? Because our industry in nature is safety conscious. Another element is the workforce. How does the future workforce look like? Does the current workforce that we have in the organization at the moment fit for the future and to serve you as the organization, whether in their current form as a composition or in terms of the skill set? Another element is relationships. What sort of relationships will then be in place in future as we navigate the uncertain environment? I cannot overemphasize what you spoke about as far as technology is concerned. Another key element that plays a major role here is research and development. Now, from a historical perspective, we all know that our industry was born many years ago, sometime in 1944, through the Chicago Convention. And I think it was at some point 55 states signed the convention. Now, what is important about this is that this is what then created the precursor of the industry we've come to know at the point. Because Article 28 of the very same Chicago Convention puts the responsibility of the provision of air navigation services and airport services on the state. So primarily, the provision of those services has in the past been the responsibility of the state. It still remains. However, a state has an option or choice of then now allowing the management and ownership of such services to a different structure. It takes me back to the next point then now, which led to us now sitting for a very long time with the tradition of state ownership of airlines, airports, and air navigation services. Now, with that setup, we then sat with a lot of policies and legislation that are more protecting. Many policies across the globe were not so inclusive. They're protecting the players within their own market, either being an airline, an airport operator, or an air navigation service provider. As a result of that, that was completely limited to no competition. Why is that the case? We all know where there's no competition, there's no options, and where there's no options, pricing is then determined by one player, and then the services become unaffordable. At the time, risk was only borne by government. The financing of the infrastructure and all these other elements from safety, security, enforcement, legislation, all of that sat with government. And as a result of the elements that I've raised, we then only had to sit with only business travelers because air travel was not affordable. Now the question is, do you still want to sit with the conventional approach? And the answer is no. History has taught us that we need to have some sort of a shift. Now, the present perspective in terms of the macro level said that we need to have financial autonomy, as in financially autonomous institutions that are able to then go and look for capital in order to invest in the industry, because as we know, it is capital intensive. Also a need for corporates to start playing a role in the industry and the participation of private sector, which also then attracted investment institutions because they saw a need and they saw certainty, they saw a lot of commitment that indicates that if you were to invest in an environment, you are able to then earn your return. Opposed to the previous setup, there was shared risk because now government would then share the risk as in terms of ICAO convention as the primary owner of the responsible structure for providing navigation services, whereas on the other side, you have a corporate that's providing such services. Another challenge that we still sit with is government taxes. IATA and other bodies in the continent that are responsible for air travel have published a number of documentation based on studies that show that across the African continent, we still sit with a number of governments that are imposing taxes on the aviation industry for a variety of reasons. And that continues to be a challenge. And the reality that we sit with as well is, as I've indicated, the global pandemic. Now, why and how will we then achieve this shift? Now, this is a comparison between where we come from a conventional approach versus the shift, which is the present and more or less what the future will look like. We have been emphasizing throughout the 2 days of the importance of safety. And as you can see, whether you're sitting on the conventional approach or you're shifting towards to the future, our industry is still safety driven. The only difference is that at the time when the approach was still sitting under the government setup, it was more supply driven. It was mainly based on the ability of the government to supply. Whereas at the moment now, when you see the corporate setup, it is only based on the demand. If there is demand, the industry will invest. If there's no demand, there's no investment. At the time when the setup was still under the conventional approach, it was more producer-oriented. Are you able to produce as government? Yes. Today, we are sitting with corporates that are saying, we are only going to serve whatever that the customer needs. You then become customer-oriented. A lot of entities in our setup have moved from the setup to be more, as we call and know it today, to be customer-centric. So the customer calls the shot in terms of how far you want to invest and how you run your business. On the other side as well, it used to be cost-driven. It was just a cost that is borne by the government, whereas now we now talk about performance-driven. Is there a need for you to be attractive? Are you performing in line with your ability to remain sustainable? Whereas on the other side, it does cost. If government could bear the cost, then the business identity would remain. Whereas in this setup, if you're not able to perform and attract investment, you will then run the risk of not being sustainable. Again, on the other side, you start with state budgets and taxes. As we all know, state budget and taxes are a very, very limited resource, and there's a lot of competing priorities from education, health, transport, and other elements. Whereas in this instance, when you move to the shift, you need to have an open and transparent setup, because corporate publish the annual financial statements and other forms of reports that are open and transparent and are attracting to the investors to show how well the company is run. There was a lot of administration in the past. At this moment now, you don't need administration, but more contract-based, as in you only remain in the industry if you can be able to fulfill your contractual obligation. Whereas in the past, because it was administrative, the system would remain for as long as government are forced to fund it. Again, the system was very rigid and stable on the other side, whereas in this instance was with more flexibility. If I were to give an example with the Ethiopian airline example that was given, if flexibility was not an element, they wouldn't be able to achieve all of those that were highlighted. Whereas in the government setup, you all know now if you were to maybe pass a budget or change your budget requirements, that has to follow another parliamentary process. If you were to change a policy or operational requirement, it has to go through high-level process. Whereas as a corporate, you sit with the flexibility that says, are you able to then change or make any effect as soon as possible? As I've indicated, all the risk was sitting with government, whereas on this side, we are sharing financial risk, because you, as a corporate, you sit with investment from across the board, from lenders, from investment institutions, and government included as well. So the risk is shared by both the corporate as a natural entity and whoever would have invested in that institution. And this remains to be the trend. There were no incentives when the government was running businesses, whereas in this instance, you still sit with now incentives and rewards, because corporates are able to pay dividends and also then attract more investment. And again, this setup that you see here across the African continent, it is still very prominent. There's still a lot of conventional approach and a little bit of the shift. And many of these are informed by economies of scale. In some instances, it is not easy to move a structure from a financial point of view for it to become a corporate, because you are now bringing in the element of financial autonomy. Now, at a glance, more at an organizational level, the shift now has indicated to us that we are sitting with unprecedented disruptions. I would not emphasize the disruptions caused by COVID, but I think more and more as we sit here, we deal on a daily basis with a lot of disruptions. And what does that say to us? As you can see on the top there, is either you change or you keep the old way. And there is a need for speed, agility, and real-time data in order to adapt. We spoke about data yesterday and how data management is key to this industry. We are a very data-intensive industry, and without data, we may not be able to exist or even be able to operate. So it will be very critical that as we need to have speed and agility, we need real-time data in order for us to make those decisions as we plan. Again, surviving is just basic in this setup. You need to more than just survive, but thrive, which is more critical. Our priorities are shifting so quick. Many organizations have reprioritized their strategies and plans many times than they have done in the past. Why? Because our priorities are shifting quickly, and not because we prefer, but because the environment dictates so. There will be a need for us to appreciate the value that will come with digital technology and automation. And as a result, within an organization, you will also need transformed business processes. If you're sitting with rigid and staggered business processes, chances of you being able to realize some of these benefits become far too limited. Now, from a perspective of the numbers, if you look at on the left-hand side for Africa as a region and you compare it to the globe, this was in April 2020 as published by our industry body council. For us, just a month into the pandemic. If you were to zoom into Africa, Africa was sitting at negative 89%, meaning at the time, the economic activity was sitting at only 11% as compared to the pre-COVID figures. Fast forward to the right-hand side, in April this year, April 2021, Africa is sitting at around about 33% of the pre-COVID numbers. Now, what I want to take away from this is, let's compare the figures in terms of recovery where Africa is sitting compared to other regions of the world that maybe in their instance were hard hit. If you look at the South American region, it is sitting at negative 48%, and we all know what happened in Brazil. If you look at the Middle East, they're sitting at negative 51%. It's still worse off as compared to Africa, and we all know what happened in India. I guess this all tells a very big story on the trajectory of where the recovery is. Africa fairly still looking well in terms of recovery, but again, there's a lot of elements and factors that are sitting outside our industry that may affect some of these numbers. However, it is pleasing to see that the recovery looks a bit far much better as compared to other regions. Now, you fast forward again to a week ago, on the 10th of October 2021, Eurocontrol published these figures where they compared 2021 to 2019. Now, again, if you look at Africa, they've then decided to divide the two regions into North and Southern Africa, minus 32% and minus 24%. If you're to average those two, you then still see a recovery of around negative 28. So as for council, as of March or April this year, Africa was sitting around about negative 33 or negative 34. In October, as in just less than a week ago, we were sitting at an average of about 28%. That is a very good sign that shows recovery. However, it still shows that we are not necessarily improving as much as we should, because where we look at from an ATNS context point of view, the figures that are related to the business we do in the continent, which contains around 30 countries, it shows us that our recovery has been stagnant for the last quarter, July, August, and as of end of September, at around about 71%. Which corroborate with the figures that you see here, that we're sitting at around about negative 28, negative 32, and our numbers are also showing the same. But again, we now start to realize some resilience in that level. We're still sitting at about 70% of pre-COVID activities, or if you want to look at it in the negative sense, about negative 32, negative 31%. Now, from a passenger point of view, I wanted to focus on the red line. And I wanted to take away from this is, you'll see in March, April 2020, that's when we experienced a dip. There was some sort of recovery all the way up to January 2021, but the recovery is very sluggish. Now, if you were to go to the right-hand side and look at the numbers in terms of revenue passengers, you're sitting at around about 200 as you speak, which is in billions, versus a historical figure or normal figure of around about 700. So if you were to do a quick sum here, you're sitting with a difference of around about 500 billion. So for this red arrow here to recover all the way very close to this blue arrow here, focused in terms of IMF and other bodies in the globe are indicating that it will take us round about until 2024, 2025. At some point last year, it was anticipated that maybe 2023, 2024. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that this is a moving target. And again, anticipation is that the future remains unpredictable, as we are expecting again a sequence of waves as far as the virus is concerned. Now, how do we then navigate the future in terms of this setup? I've identified 4 key areas. One is the need for government support. Why government support? Because there is a need for a policy shift. And as we say all the time, that the disadvantage with the policies and the laws is that they are not always in touch with reality. Why? Because reality is dynamic, and then the laws are more static. So they then take a reactive approach. So there is a need for us to continuously look into certain areas where there is a need for a policy shift. We spoke a lot about collaboration, and then in this instance, from a government point of view, one most critical element, especially in the continent, is the military civil aviation operation collaboration. Those who are involved in the region will tell you that in many instances, when you deal with regional cooperation project in the continent, historically, because we know the military was responsible or has been responsible for the airspace, many other countries were able to manage the relationship between military and civil aviation operation. However, it has proven historically that the hindrance in the region for us to be able to realize some of the cooperation that we need is the relationship between military and civil aviation operations. You may find that in certain countries, there is collaboration between the military and the civil aviation operations. However, once you start to talk about interregional or inter-county relations, then they start to hit a snag. And that's where the challenge is. And this will also require that level of support of government, because collaboration at government level is very critical. Another important element is the regional integration and trade. I will not talk much about the two programs. I think we're all familiar with the single African air transport market, as well as the African continental free trade area. These are also very critical elements, because they will then stimulate demand and interregional trade, which will benefit the industry within the region. Tourism as well, very critical. Achieving many of those will then ensure that we do have a tourism industry that is flourishing in the continent. As we all know, there's a lot of tourist attractions in the continent, and with that will then bring a lot of demand for our services. Multilateral bodies cannot be left out. We are sitting with ICAO, AFCAC, and our regional economic communities. In our setup, we are sitting with the SADC regional economic community. Broadly in the Southern African region, we also have COMESA, we also have the East African community. And it will be important that we start to have these inter-regional relationships and multilateral bodies assisting us in implementing many of this. And all this lies with a level of government support that is required for the future. Another important aspect is collaborations. This cannot be overemphasized. I think we need new relationships, and those new relationships are all to do with inter-industry relations. Yesterday, we mentioned the need for our defense industry being able to add value into our civil aviation environment. And those are some of the collaborations that are needed, the inter-industry relations, including as well our industry bodies interlinking. In their own nature, we do have council within our ANSP setup. We have IATA in the airline setup, ACI in the airport setup, ASA and AFRA in the airline setup. We will need, again, inter-industry body collaboration. As much as we do have value as industries, specific industries under our industry bodies, there will be a need for more collaboration between these industry bodies across industries. Strategic partnerships, very, very, very key. We may have learned through the airlines. Airlines have started the alliances many, many, many years ago. And now I've realized that as a business that is trying to reach the global market, there are certain areas where you cannot have a physical reach. And for you to be able to do that, you need an alliance or some type of strategic partnership. This will become key as well across our industries in the airport setup and navigation setup. Joint ventures as well, whichever structure that you may put in place, there will be areas where, especially when you do research and development, that you may need investment or manufacturing capacity. Because as an ANSP or as an airport operator or as an airline or manufacturer, you may need that manufacturing capacity through a joint venture with a manufacturer. Last but not least is the technology element. There is evolution. We need to adapt, and technology will bring with it efficiencies that we need as we build into the future. Now, the biggest question that we have is your industry prepared for disruption? This is the status quo. Now, the answer to that is, are you ready then to challenge the status quo? As we're all familiar with the domino effect picture here, if you are able to challenge the status quo, make sure that the domino effect does not have an effect on you. My last and parting shot is that what we have learned so far since the coronavirus was declared a global pandemic just over a year ago is that adaptation and innovation are at the core of the survival of any business. So in our instance, for us to survive, we will rely on our ability to adapt and innovate. Program Director, that will be my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really truly appreciate your contribution to Avi Afrique 2021, but most importantly, we appreciate your contribution in our immediate space, in our day-to-day interactions. We've seen governments, airports, airlines, and NSPs, including our own, take a fundamental shift in strategies under the unprecedented grips and pressures of the pandemic. You are correct. The new environment has demanded dynamism from us. As we prepare for a different industry environment post the pandemic, we need concerted, collaborative efforts from all industry role players, governments, investors, airlines, operators, leaders, professional bodies, labor movements, and as well as customers to prepare adequately for a better future. Thank you so much, Mr. Lafodi. Valued guests, as we move forward, I do take cognizance of the fact that we are slightly behind schedule. Our next speaker will come in, and thereafter we'll have the break as promised. It is with great pleasure that I welcome onto the platform yet another innovator in global aviation industry, Mr. Frank Ogochuko, with the topic Agility in Modern Aviation. Mr. Ogochuko, a Microsoft hero and world-class CIO, was the project co-author, NAMA World Bank-funded West Central Africa Air Transport Safety and Security Program, Group Lead, International Telecoms Union Focus Group on Aviation Cloud WG4, Avionics and Aviation Communication Systems. He has delivered innovative safety mission critical systems for the safety and security of air navigation as General Manager and CIO for NAMA. His aviation career started with communications, then surveillance and ICT. Attended several courses, including the ATSEP License System Program, DFS Academy, Germany, and CNS ATM for Engineering at the ATA, South Africa. Has worked with Aeron on space-based ADSB as well as Unifly on unmanned traffic management solutions for drones, UAS, UAVs. Mr. Ogochuko, a licensed ATSEP with ratings in communications and surveillance, is an aeronautical telecommunications engineer and business administration graduate from the Nigeria College of Aviation Technology and the University of Abuja, respectively. He holds a master's degree with distinction in communications management from the University of Rwanda, master's degree in information technology, and a postgraduate diploma in transport management from the Ladoke Ankitola University of Technology, Ogbomosho. Mr. Ogochuko, a member of several professional bodies, is a certified management trainer, curriculum developer, and certified information security consultant with passion for aviation, cybersecurity, and innovation. Currently, the Chief Technology Strategist, Debbie Michelle Group, co-founder, Aviation Africa Platform, and founder, CIO Masterclass Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ogochuko.
Thank you so very much, moderator. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and all protocols duly observed. I just want to thank ATNS for the opportunity to be able to share my thoughts this afternoon regarding the issue of agility in aviation. You know, this type of COVID. So let's just get on with it. I mean, I've been introduced already, so we're going to be looking at a few things here this afternoon. Introduction, which is basically what I'm doing right now. We're going to look at aviation before COVID-19. Look at a few quick definitions, then aviation during COVID-19, emerging post-COVID-19, which a lot actually is packed within this particular item. Then we'll conclude. Of course, we'll do the Q&A as well. So I'm going to start with this quote, which was given by Jack Welch, who used to be the former chairman and CEO of General Electric. He said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, then of course the end is near. This reflects COVID-19 and also with the issue of agility we're talking about speed. Rate of change on the inside is slower than the rate of change on the outside, and the end is near. So whether it's an individual, a nation, or community organization, this is very critical. All right, so before COVID-19, I mean, aviation was basically, there were certain projections that were given about aviation, which some other speakers have spoken about. But the point here is the fact that it was predicted that aviation is going to grow by 5.9 in Africa, particularly 5.9%, and by 2036, we're going to see about 274 million passengers annually for aviation total market of 400 million passengers. You know, aviation contributions to the global economy cannot be underrated because there's so much aviation is doing in terms of GDP, 3.5% globally, which is equated to $2.7 trillion US, and it creates about 65 million jobs globally. So aviation is a huge contributor to the global economy. And of course, with the UN SDG goals, aviation is actually an enabler of UNDG SDG goals as well. So looking at these projections, COVID has come to distort it. So let's see, hopefully, in the post-COVID era, the new normal era, because we're still emerging, we're still not yet out of the COVID, basically. Now, we're in a changing world, as it were. This is actually a quote by Saroja Bannister. Talks about Africa, you know, and it's also quoted in the Prime Minister of UAE's book that he wrote. He said, every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up. It knows it must outrun the fastest lion or it will be killed. Also, in the same Africa, every morning, a lion wakes up. It knows it must run faster than the slowest gazelle or it will starve. This talks about speed, and we're talking about agility this afternoon. It talks about speed. So it doesn't matter whether you're a lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you need to start running. You need to start running. Speed and agility. So today's world, basically, today's world is dynamic. We're interconnected, as it were, in this world today. And so organizations basically must, as a matter of fact, learn and prepare to be able to cope. It's something that must happen to cope and thrive in conditions of crisis and change, because whether we like it or not, crisis must happen, changes must always occur as well. So, and this change has several characteristics. It can be permanent change or continuous change. It can be discontinuous, it can be incremental, it can be radical, it can be expected change or unexpected. COVID-19 was unexpected, basically. It could be reversible or reversible and can come with very intensity at many different levels. COVID has a lot of variants, mutations, and all of that. So it kept changing and all that, basically. You know, so again, this change is becoming increasing. It's become so frequent that its impacts on the global economy, including aviation and NSUs particularly, cannot be overlooked. And so the aviation industry must take cognizance of this change and be able to prepare for it. COVID-19 is an example which has been overflogged. This is yesterday. So it's actually an example of what has happened in our world today. So looking at all of this, the issue of sustainability, digitalization, resilience, agility, and the capacity to measure performance in real terms becomes imperative in the face of this seismic change with regards to COVID-19 we're looking at today. So we're going to look at the quick definitions right now, because I'm going to try and be as quick as possible. So agility and resilience, they are two sides of the same coin. So they have similar bearing on the management of complex safety and security critical operations, just like aviation. Aviation is a complex safety and security critical operation environment. So in terms of agility and resilience, it talks about adaptability of our operations as aviation in the face of this current unforeseen circumstance that, of course, was fully not avoidable and is essentially a VUCA scenario. VUCA talks about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. That has affected human life and the entire global ecosystem, basically. So, what is resilience in itself? So, it's the capacity for any organization to be able to absorb and respond and even reinvent itself, adapting, if required, to internal and external fast and disruptive change or shock that cannot be avoided as well as known or anticipated. So it's actually an intrinsic value or capacity of an organization to be able to, function before, during, and after a shock sustainably. I say everything is okay. That's the essence of resilience, basically. So agility itself talks about the capacity. So vision itself, in terms of resilience, aviation basically was resilient in a lot of ways, and that's also been underscored earlier on by the chairperson of the board. Agility is the capacity for moving quickly, speed, flexibly, and decisively in anticipating, initiating, and taking advantage of opportunities. So within the shock situation, shock scenario, within the environment of change, what agility helps us actually to do actually is see opportunities and avoiding negative consequences of that change. So that's what agility is. Now, what does agility and resilience help us do? Basically, two things. Resilience, like I said, helps people, organizations to rebound and manage. That's very important. Manage through adversity and extreme change. So it's about absorption and adaptation within. So keeping everything stable. That's what resilience does. I mean, looking at COVID-19, NSPs were resilient because they kept the operations running in spite of the pandemic and all that. But were they agile? That's something we need to discover. Were they actually agile? Agile helps people to pivot. Pivoting basically has to do with changing your business model or business characteristics entirely different because of the change and existing environment that you find yourself in. Agility helps people to solve problems and innovate under those changing conditions. So agility rides on resilience. Agility basically rides on resilience. A few more definitions as we go on. Again, United Nations, ICAO talks about sustainable development, but let me look at sustainability itself. It has to do with, can be seen as processes by which something is kept at the same level. So something that's sustained, that's kept at the same level. However, sustainability is defined as the capacity to meet the needs of the present, okay, without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. That's actually an ICAO definition of sustainability. And it rests on three pillars: the economic pillar, the social pillar, and of course, the environmental pillar. But however, for me, what's of most interest for me in this discourse is the economic pillar, which relates to whether the industry, the NSP, has the ability to be financially successful. Again, remember, during this period, NSPs have lost so much money because they're not getting paid for the service they're delivering. So, economic pillar. Excuse me. Now, performance management, according to ICAO again, it says it's a systematic approach to improvement within an organization that consists of the following: definition of strategy and its execution. That's the method through the alignment of its resources, internal and external resources, and behavior, culture, and behavior of the organization. It actually basically helps the organization to understand how it can improve, and it helps with collaboration and cooperation within the organization and external stakeholders. And of course, in terms of management and leadership, it communicates the unified vision of an organization, general strategy. That's what basically, that's what that is. Now, something that is very key, as we mentioned as well, digitization and digitalization. Again, digitization has to do with basically converting from one state to the other. So you're converting information from analog to digital form without changing the content of that information. It's just the mode and the form that is converted, but the content still remains the same. So you automate the processes that also automate processes with that as well. So whether paper manual processes or labor-intensive processes. Then digitalization, which again has another name like digital transformation. It refers to the employment of digital technologies and digitized data to change how business is conducted, totally change how it's delivered. And the examples of that basically, So now, looking at COVID-19, was the world prepared for COVID-19? Absolutely no. COVID-19 was a surprise. It was a shock to the whole world. Nobody knew was going to happen. Nobody anticipated it. Nobody was aware of it. Nobody's actually, it has never happened before. So looking at the aviation environment, before the lockdowns and restrictions, there was no aviation organization or service provider that had a COVID-19 business continuity plan or emergency management system or emergency response plan in place that has before now imagined the whole of the total disruptive effect of COVID-19 on its operations and sustainable cash flow and business development. No organization had it. So just a preparedness. There's no economic environment in the world that was prepared for COVID-19. So because there was no playbook at all that was created or developed that has to address COVID-19, which again is an external environment that has both the supply and demand shock effects. It has both the supply and demand shock effects, basically both sides. So supply shock in terms that the cost of delivering service, the output, actually increased in the sense that, again, NSPs were delivering services, they're not getting any returns for that service. So they are actually, incurring costs without commensurate revenue. So the cost of that service, supply shock, element to the whole thing. Of course, demand shock. There were no passengers flying. Airlines, who is the direct customer of the NSP, we're not flying because passengers who are direct customers of the airline, we're not flying as well because of the issue of the health protocol. So the supply and demand shock affected the capability of the NSP to get revenue, and the airlines to be able to also get revenue from the passengers and be able to patronize the NSPs to be able to deliver service to them. So that also something that, so the issue of COVID-19 just disrupted everything basically in the world. So COVID-19, like it's called the black swan. Its occurrence was totally different, unlike Ebola that was regional in scope or location dependent, like the Middle East, MERS 2012 and the SARS from Asia and all that. They were all regionally located, but COVID-19 was global in scope and in nature. So the effect was totally global. Now, like I said earlier on, this is a VUCA scenario: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So this defines the COVID basically in terms of the fact that it created a change that is so rapid and unpredictable in its nature and extent. I mean, disrupted everything. In terms of complex or uncertain, the present is unclear because things keep changing and evolving with the impact of COVID-19. And the future it presented was actually uncertain when at this peak and all that. So complex. I mean, there's so many factors that complicated the whole COVID-19 scenario. Even social media impact and all of that. Everything was people had their own ways of what COVID is, what the mitigations are, and all of that. So there was so much complexity around the world. Then ambiguity. There was no clarity in regards to how to deal with COVID-19 within the aviation environment as well. There's no clarity because there was no playbook that has been written that defines how you can mitigate impact and the effect of COVID-19. So in essence, basically, both the supply and demand elements of external environment impacted on the NSPs because there was no revenue, they were delivering services, no revenue coming to them and all that. Now, because of what has happened, a lot of global aviation efforts kicked in. ICAO in April 2020 started the ICAO CAT. The AU and AFCAC as well set up the high-level task force. IATA also was part of it. AFRA as well. The ACI also gave guidance for airports, African airports to start. Of course, Council also, which is actually a group of NSPs globally, also had a lot of work they did within Africa as well, with regards to reducing the impact of COVID, basically. And just to put this in perspective, in terms of losses, I'm just going to focus on ASP losses for Africa. This just talks about the global loss and all that, but look at Africa itself. African NSPs, the total revenue loss for 2020 was $570.76 million, according to ICAO statistics. Okay, so agility drivers, which is very important remember, like I said, agility rides on resilience. So NSPs basically were very resilient. I mean, that's because they kept delivering the service. So there was stability of service, but in terms of agility, that didn't happen because they couldn't pivot. They kept delivering the same kind of service, even in the face of supply and demand shocks, and they were not getting revenue for it. So they couldn't pivot, basically. And of course, there are a few examples of organizations in the industry that pivoted, like is being told about Ethiopian Airlines. So VOCA can be an enabler for a driver for agility. So depending on the kind of ownership structure of that organization, I mean, the last paper spoke about ownership structure a lot, and organizational structure, management structure, and all that, which has an effect on the ability for organization to pivot. So with the issue of bureaucracy within government-owned organizations, it's difficult to pivot because before you go to the process, I mean, you've actually lost the ability to be able to gain speed and all that. So technology actually is a driver to that, applying the appropriate technology. The customer base and stakeholders actually help you to be agile. Your intent and ability to actually be able to ensure that you sustain your business and have this return on investment is also very critical. Then your strategy, short-term and long-term strategy. Do you have a forward-looking strategy or a traditional based strategy or defensive strategy? That's what determines whether you're going to be agile or not. Some of the few barriers: ownership structure is a major barrier. The organizational and management structure is also a major barrier. The culture of the organization, the behavior pattern, the norms of the organization also is a major barrier to agility. Bureaucracy within the organization also is within the organization and externally. That's of government-owned aviation organizations and NSPs. Issue of regulatory compliance mechanism. In aviation, basically, aviation is too conservative because the issue of safety and security and human life. So the aviation is too slow in adopting new ways of doing things, whether it's technology, whether it's processes and procedures and all of that. It's too slow to doing that. Okay, so issue of procurement and acquisition processes, investments can also be a barrier to agility. Risk appetite, treating innovation as a risk, because when you're innovative, you're not even though you have something in mind you're looking at, but you're actually uncertain whether it's going to happen or not. So most organizations, depending on the leadership, particularly in the aviation industry, they treat innovation as a risk. So innovation is something that has to happen for agility to happen. So what kind of risk appetite do we have within the aviation environment? In the last part talks about the risk, whether you're a government organization or private sector, the risks are shared if you're there, but government alone. So again, prioritizing stability over being dynamic or adaptive, defensive strategies. So these are basically some of the barriers. I mean, it's not exhaustive, but just some of the barriers against agility. So in looking at agility, we're going to basically look at a few things with regards to agility, the impact and all of that with COVID-19 to organizations. I'll just list a few of them. But for me, the key thing actually that I talked about, the 3 pillars of sustainability: economic, social, and environment. Economic is key for me. The ability for organizations to be able to be financially successful is key. All of this. Okay, so now looking at all of this, looking at this personnel, the impact of COVID on personnel, operational and non-operational. Of course, the environment where we're in, most people have to work from home, so we had remote working and all of that. Most of the non-operational staff had to basically stay home and all that. So operationally, I mean, we had excess capacity. The airspace is limited. It's a finite resource. Okay, that resource was available, but it was underutilized because there are no customers, which is the airlines, taking a space within that airspace to be able to help the NSP generate revenue. So we actually underutilized during COVID. So we didn't pivot, basically. If I give a very simplistic example of pivot, because again, eventually NSP needs to begin to think about their business models and think differently what they can do with the massive infrastructure they have today. Some of them which are idle and not being used and all that, they need to begin to rethink and reimagine how they need to deliver service. Like I said, it's a simplistic example. I know there's somebody I know who had a factory that manufactured liquid car wash soap. So COVID-19 came and he had to pivot. The same equipment, same machinery, everything he had to pivot and began to use that same equipment and machinery to begin to manufacture sanitizers, because that was the product that was selling at that time during the COVID. So from manufacturing liquid soap and all that, he had to pivot, change his business direction entirely, and began to manufacture sanitizers. So that's a very simplistic example of pivoting. But again, we need to look for ways we can apply that within the NSP, based on our assets as an NSP, the kind of assets we have. So work environment, remote working had to happen, remote maintenance has to happen. That calibration had to be delayed. The cycles, calibration has to be delayed. Of course, some people had to pivot and became agile and use drones for calibration during the COVID. So many SPs had to use drones for flight calibration. Training and competency validity has to be extended as well. And training was not done because training has to actually defer because of, and of course, look at the health management protocols and all of that. So what are the metrics to look at agility, basically? Because the key point actually is looking at agility itself. Agility, like I said, right on two things: dynamic capability and resilience. That's stability, right? It actually sits on both. So within the innovation landscape, the NSPs were very resilient because they maintained stability, service were running and all that. But the key thing actually was that there were no revenues coming into the NSP environment. And so these elements, financial, operational, social, environmental, regulatory, stakeholder engagement, human capital, and all that. Now, one thing that actually is very, 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 very funny during the COVID was the environmental element here. We had cleaner airspaces because, number one, there was restriction and lockdown. There are very few cars on the road. There are no aircraft flying. So the airspace was cleaner because there were no emissions and all of that. So on the environmental aspect, I mean, had cleaner airspace and all that, but that did not happen due to agility. It happened because of the constraint of COVID, basically. So operationally, capacity utilization was underutilized. Safety and security was ensured. Social aspect, the workplace environment, the interaction between staff and stakeholders and all of that. Regulatory issues. The regulator basically had to begin to learn afresh and begin to set up regulatory environment that had to enable continuation of those NSP services, even though it was not being paid for, but it was available for humanitarian flights and all of that. So stakeholder engagement. Of course, there were a lot of virtual collaborations within the African environment. Council had engagements with NSPs, ICAO has, and ACI and all that. So that actually happened. Now for the human capital, for me, which is very critical. I mean, the human capital is the most valuable asset of any organization. And so within the agility framework, there has to be shared vision between the management and employees, shared responsibility. There has to be agile teams in organization. There has to be collaboration and cooperation within the organization itself to ensure that everybody understands what to do. So bureaucracy has to be eliminated, basically, within agile environments. So iterations happen rapidly. Changes happen rapidly. So you don't have to wait for someone to sign off. Maybe the CEO to sign off before something happens. Those teams have responsibility and authority to be able to sign off on those iterations they actually develop and establish. Okay, so I mean, we talked about Ethiopian Airlines already here. Example of organization actually that pivoted. Singapore Airlines, they had to convert their A380 Airbus A380 to a flying restaurant. So there are people who paid and had a 1 hour flight in the air just to eat. So they made money from that as well. Thai Airways converted their restaurant into a full-fledged restaurant, and they had all their cabin crew dressed up in their uniforms, and people came there to eat as well and dine. So simple examples of pivoting from a line perspective. I mean, the Ethiopian airline issue has been exhausted by the two previous speakers. So these are examples of pivoting in an airline environment. So NSPs, airports, I don't think any airport actually pivoted because they're all about resilience, really. For NSPs, I mentioned using flight calibration, using drones for flight calibration, of course, remote access infrastructure, like the UK NAS, they had to do FATs virtually with Indira in Spain, and all that. So the environment of work has to change and all of that. So, but the thing is, are there tangible assets and even intangible assets that NSP has that can enable them to pivot during crises like this, changes like this? And do they have those assets? And the answer is yes. Those assets are available for NSPs, basically, to pivot and deliver services because of the industry where they belong, highly regulated, high safety levels, security levels, and all of that. So the aviation industry actually positioned to deliver services, not just for aeronautical purposes, but even for non-aeronautical purposes, and be able to earn revenue from it. So that's something that the NSP is going to look inward, reimagine business models, change their perception of what the NSP is today, and begin to look at new ways of delivering service, so that in case of future crisis, they can also be able to pivot and deliver services and still have revenue and be sustainable. For CAAs, they have to learn. They have to learn with each evolving issue of COVID-19. I mean, they have to do regulatory circulars and all that. They have to have meetings depending on each country's CAA and all that. So everybody had a learning curve basically during COVID-19. So it's just a quote. It says confusion is part of the game. Okay? Excuse me, part of the game. And actually, being frightened is part of the game too. You have to figure out how to engage with that confusion, engage with that fear, and flip that into an opportunity. We must learn to see opportunities in the midst of crisis. We must learn to do that as NSPs. We learn to do that. It's important. One key thing for me is Aviation 4.0. We're talking about technology, the fourth industrial revolution. That's something that, for me, it's critical for aviation. That's what is going to, push aviation into the next frontier, basically. So and gradually, aviation today is transitioning to Aviation 4.0, okay, with all kinds of technology, which I'm just going to list them out, basically. Where cyber physical systems will be designed to assist humans in those very strenuous, labor-intensive, repetitive jobs. So the technology takes over all of those things and helps the human to be more effective and all that. And it also enhances safety, basically, because once a machine understands the process and does it, either through machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all of that, it's actually perfect. Because human beings are subject to emotion and all of that. So artificial intelligence basically has proven to be an effective tool for extracting useful information from image databases, okay, in aviation environments, and for performing repetitive, time-consuming tasks requiring mainly operators within the aviation sector for the NSP. So some of those technologies are basically ATM visualization. Today we have remote digital data towers being functioned. The London City Airport is actually being controlled by remote digital tower that is not within the airport environment. So virtually ACCs is actually happening today, even in Europe and all that. So again, the world is going for Vision 4.0. Where is Africa in all of this? Because that's what will enable resilience, enhance resilience, and agility for the African aviation. Intelligent monitoring systems, IoTs, space-based AGSB was mentioned earlier on. Again, based on the ICAO convention and all of that, anytime a private sector organization wants to provide an aviation service, we'll go back to the fact that it's a state's responsibility. Yes, it is. However, being a state of really does not make it effective and efficient. The answer is no. So the earlier we begin to change that thinking and mindset and begin to adopt this public-private sector mentality and mindset to engage the private sector. Space-based AGSB is a private sector entity, even though some NSPs actually bought into it, like the NSP, the Italian NSP and all that. But however, it's actually a private sector entity area. And so it is providing global-based surveillance radar-like services. Cloud-based services are the eating today. Simulators for training, you can do simulator training, robot training, all that. That's the things that actually bring technology to the fore. Augmented reality, virtual reality, that makes training efficient remotely with AR and VR. Digital workbenches, for maintenance, drones, blockchain, robotics. Blockchain talks more about security than anything else. Blockchain, robotics, remote ATNS, for cyber protection. These are things. These are the aviation 4.0, elements of technology that will actually change the aviation landscape, in the next frontier. So ATM performance management. I'm just going to try and push over this quickly. So why do we have to do performance? So what you can measure, you can manage. So if NSPs do not measure what they do, then they can manage that environment effectively. So performance management for ATM is very critical and all that. It basically tells how your business is doing. It helps to make smart decisions and it helps to track progress and all that. So performance management is critical for NSPs. Not just, it's critical for everybody, but NSPs particularly because of the environment where we are. So you have to define your objective in a data-driven world where we are in now, because aviation industry generates humongous data, big data. And those data have insights for decision making if it's analyzed, properly analyzed, and those insights are actually gleaned and all that. So it helps the aviation industry to be able to know how to, know how they're doing and be able to look into the future as well. Some of the things to measure basically are daily performance measurement and reporting, trend analysis, look back at the play of track in 2D and 3D with GIS overlays, track parameters for user computations, performance shortfalls to guide infrastructure investments, PBN compliance reporting, such as rescue and so on. These are some of the elements. There are other KPIs and KPIs that can be defined. Key performance areas and key performance indicators can be defined. But these are just a few of them, basically. So benefits, increase safety, efficiency, and environmental impact, more effective system operational changes, reduce operational costs, improve collaboration with aviation system stakeholders, connecting the dots between NSP specific needs and ICAO ASBO's airspace system block units and infrastructure investments. Of course, there are several tools for performance management in aviation. Integrated tool set for air traffic operations analysis, enabled tools and services, maintenance performance toolbox, electronic logbooks, ATM head management systems. Now, Skype is just one of those tools. Just wanted to mention it. You can actually use for performance management within the NSP environment. Now, quickly, I want to look at NSP recovery mechanism. NSP recovery mechanism. During the emerging, we're actually still in the emerging post-COVID-19. Some of this I'm going to mention, I'm just going to skip it because it's actually been mentioned by some of the other speakers. Now, for the NSP to recover and thrive in the emerging post-COVID-19 world, aviation operation would need to build a new foundation of success, one that breaks free of traditional orthodoxies and embraces heightened levels of collaboration and partnership that reflects the demands of the changed world. So, financial support. Now, in the short term, government and development partners need to provide financial support to NSPs. As we mentioned severally, NSPs need to look at their business models currently and reimagine their business model, change those businesses, tweak them, think out with them. Let it reflect the changing environment where we're in with regards to all of the current and future changes that will keep happening and crises that will keep happening. Ownership structure has to change. Private sector investment has to come in. Service return has to also change. NSP can be a service. NSP as a service. We're having somebody as a service now with space-based ADSB. So you can have several elements of the CNS as a service provided by private sector regulation and all that. So the cost of infrastructure basically drastically goes down because you don't have the infrastructure. You're actually paying just for a service. So that's something we really look at. Health safety is now part of us. It's an element of aviation safety now. Health safety. Again, NSP do look at their existing assets, take an inventory of them, look at their deficiencies, and look at what assets they have to do. They can provision to be able to provide services for other NSPs in Africa or other organizations outside the mentioned environment. They need to look at those assets. Okay. For staff, I think it's important for me. The mistake oftentimes, okay, there are two strategic renewal school of thought. One is traditional and defensive. The other one is future-looking strategy. For the traditional ones, when there's downturn and all of that, recession and all that, the first target is actually to reduce staff. But it's been proven by research, by Carlos Martin and Eva Paga, that look, those forward-looking strategy organizations that basically they increase their budget for R&D and innovation, they retain their staff. They're better off in terms of net profits okay, and operating profits during and after those crises. So, but the primary, the default setting for most of the management actually is to try and reduce staff. But I think we need to keep, our vision is to keep their men and women, retain their men and women, because there's so much investment has been done in those employees, particularly the core personnel of the mission environment. So for the regulatory requirements for CAAs, there's need for policy and framework that will ensure accelerated recovery of NSPs from the pandemic, stronger and more resilient to continue to serve the needs of managing safety and efficiency in our skies. So what does that basically mean? There has to be regulatory establishment environment where regulatory autonomy exists. So the regulator needs to be autonomous, so they can be able to deliver on its mandate. Okay, there has to be a push for global interoperability and the path to seamless integration and safeguard value in ATM technology investment by pursuing adoption of open source system standard. Now, this is important because we are tied down to proprietary standards from manufacturers, OEMs, and it's not helping us. So if you have an open standard environment, it's actually better. So you can actually modify your system to suit your unique needs and all that. Stay compliant with the ICAO, standards and recommended practices and all of the recommendations and all that. So there has to be more push towards effective performance-based regulation from our regulators, so that important system enhancements are no longer delayed because they involve enabling technologies that do not fit current perspective regulation. So there has to be performance-based approach. I mean, we have things like required communication performance, required surveillance performance, required navigation performance, and all that. So let those things, those criteria that have been enunciated in those documents define what investment technology that NSPs need to do. Again, that's going to help to reduce cost because you're not tied down to an OEM, so it actually helps to reduce cost. Develop institutional and regulatory framework that promote and attract private capital investment in Africa aviation, P3, public-private sector, and also transform NSPs into other public autonomous companies, still owned by government, but they are public autonomous companies or private entities or a mix of both, public and private, so that ensuring that there's adequate financing to regulators. So regulators still state-owned, yeah, but of course the NSPs, airports, and all of that, actually move the ownership structure just changes into other autonomous companies or private entities, so that now the vision partners as well needs to support African states in the implementation of optimal institutional frameworks that are required for the particular national governments. So there should be, ICAO, which is this, as a matter of fact, talks about delineation of responsibility and all that. You can't be a service provider and regulator at the same time. So the function is the regulator has to be regulator alone and independent. So other service providers like the airport, the NSP, and so on must be independent on their own. So there has to be clear strategies designed to guarantee financial sustainability and economic oversight of all institutional entities when separating these functions. Now, for the AU, for me, this is also very important. I mean, the speaker before the last talked about a lot of some of these things now. So the AU needs to create a framework to sustain the long-term viability of African aviation by standardizing regional compliance requirements and harmonizing of regulations at Africa's regional level. But it's also aligned to ICAO SAPs and ICAO SAPs, which states and civil aviation authorities should adopt. Okay. Again, there should be funding for NSPs now in the short term to be able to issue palliatives for them, financial palliatives for them, so they can recover from the revenue losses. Actually they had during the 2020 and even 2021. NSPs needs to be integrated in Africa. We need to pursue the single African sky. I mean, ASECNA is 17 countries operating together as an entity, it's a governmental organization and all that. So we need to make AU needs to ensure that this talk about the single African SATIM and all of that needs to be reality. African NSP needs to integrate because it's going to reduce cost. It's going to help for cost reduction in investment in infrastructure, maintenance, staffing, training, and all of that, if there's an integration. And it's going to also bring a lot of resilience and agility and service delivery, quality service delivery within the African aviation environment. So again, looking at digital African sky with cyber resilience capabilities, uniform standards for the health protocol for COVID. Africa should have its own uniform standards so that travel within Africa can be homogeneous, can be actually be easy with the same standard health protocols defined by Africa for Africa. That is going to encourage tourism as well. I talked about the certain thing. Visa relaxation has to happen. You can't travel and tourism cannot actually grow without relaxation of visa protocols and all that. I mean, you talked about protocol of free movement of persons and all that. That's not happening yet, so that has to be done. Of course, the issue of airport environment, contactless services for the airport, travel facilitation has to happen as well by imbibing digital technologies. So post-COVID-19, new normal. Aviation's post-pandemic recovery will require a new level of cooperation across airlines, airports, innovation organizations, partners, security agencies, support services and commercial and retail services, regulators and customers. It will demand greater collection and sharing of data. Sharing of information is critical in this. I mean, yesterday somebody talked about SWIM, system-wide information management. That's very critical. That infrastructure needs to be in place for aviation. Embrace digital technology with automation, and more investment in digital technologies need to make sense of that data. Needed to make sense of that data. Acquisition of new equipment or introduction of new technologies. It requires agility, flexibility, and innovative thinking in every area of business for NSPs in Africa. Flexible working modes. With COVID now, it has to be hybrid or remote working and on-premise working and all that. Training can be done basically virtually. So you do simulator training online. I mean, there are a lot of simulator-based training services that are done in the cloud. So training mode has also changed. Performance toolboxes, increased innovation budgets, innovation fees and innovative fees and charges. Pricing mechanism needs to be tweaked as well. So the innovation industry can begin to look at how do we price our services. Are we going to still maintain the traditional way of pricing, aircraft type, the call-up weight, the distance, and all that? I'm going to still use that as a mechanism for pricing. Is there a way we can actually tweak that pricing mechanism to actually, bring in some other things that will aid our direct customer, the airline, and of course impact on the indirect customer, the passengers as well. We take, and of course, I talked about we take their staff and look at what are the shortcomings in qualified personnel and build an agile workforce. That is very critical. With contingent reserve fund, there has to be contingent reserve fund. Most NSPs didn't have that reserve fund. So what they basically they're owned by government, particularly by government. So they need to basically go back to government and look for funding and palliative and all that. Provision of contingency and emergency equipment, mobile facilities like mobile control towers and all that. Now we're talking about digital tower, remote digital towers and virtual centers and all that. So you can actually provision services from one virtual center to another. So a network of virtual centers and all that. And I see a feature whereby ATM service can become an app. Can actually become an app. ATM service can have gone on a mobile phone and all that. So build on non-aeronautical revenue. Develop training capability to reduce cost and have resident trainers within the organizations. Have capacity for collaboration to reduce cost and create additional revenue. Commercialize each chatting services, flight procedures, and so on. Provide consulting, ANS, telecoms, and IT services. Be investment driven post-COVID-19. Just to wrap up. Okay, so aviation decision makers must ensure that their organizations are prepared for shocks and that recovery procedures are available in the event of major shocks like COVID-19. They must identify likely channels and prepare for such shocks, decreasing the exposure to risks that such shocks represent, as well as strategically innovate, adapt, and recover from shocks like COVID-19. So resilience, agility, flexibility, innovation, these are all the things that need to be done. Strategic aviation managers must accept not denial of the higher level of unpredictability in the environment, because change must always happen, and adopt strategic plans in response by aligning their internal structures, procedures, and resources to the changing environment. With understanding that those changes in the environment, such as COVID-19, might diminish the efficiency and efficacy of initiatives, perhaps leading to operational decline. In terms of agility, aviation managers must understand and apply The long-term strategy vital element sense, seize, and transform, which refers to the theory of dynamic capabilities, whose goal is to integrate, build, and reconfigure internal and external competencies to address rapidly changing environments as an organization. So sense talks about distribution between short and long-term impact of that change. Looking at your business model, your supply chain, your workforce, and resource base of your organization as well. Season has to do with understanding what is vital to create an ambidextrous organization, which means that the organization can be efficient in its management of today's business, but also adapted for coping with tomorrow's change as well, and transforming. It has to build scalability of an organization to transform its asset structure and accomplish the necessary internal and external transformation, pivoting, it change business model. Although COVID-19 cannot be predicted in terms of occurrence or impact, it does present an opportunity to reset Africa's aviation industry completely through reforms, new strategies, and restructurings. During and after such shocks, aviation proactive management of uncertainty and a strong long-term perspective may help the firms and aviation organization adapt to changes in the external environment faster and more efficiently, thereby helping to manage even black swan events in the future. The ecosystem touch on an efficient, effective, safe, and secure and regular air transport system governed by the plethora of regulations and various documents. However, there are enablers that will ensure the sustainability of these ideals objectives, namely agility, innovation, resilience, sustainability in a continuously rapidly changing business landscape accelerated by technology. Very, very important. The industry needs to be flexible, nimble, and agile with their business operations, amplify its competency-based approach with social skills and critical thinking and enhanced cooperation and collaboration. They need to actually invite the 4IR, the Aviation 4.0, with cybersecurity, protection, and all of that. That's very critical. Then, for implementing the latest tools, adopting smart infrastructure, partnership is key now in our world, aviation world. Partnership is key. The aviation industry needs to retain their most valuable assets, their employees. It has to be service-oriented, performance-based approach for the provision of air traffic and air navigation services, away from equipment-based methodology and all that. And finally, digital transformation enables agility. So, achieving agility is a major investment, but the beauty of agile is it's team-driven momentum. If done well, if agility is done well, driving innovation doesn't involve pushing teams as much as it does getting out of their way to enable them to deliver on their mandates. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ogochuko. Thank you, very insightful presentation indeed, Mr. Ogochuko. Thank you. Exciting presentation from our speakers as well. What an insight shared by our honorable speakers. I like what Dr. Lasko said when she said we need to look at digitization and agile diversification approach in doing our business. That statement also aligns with what Mr. Lehori said when he mentioned that we need to change the way we do business. Basically, inter-body collaborations and strategic collaborations are the key to defining our survival. Mr. Ogochuko also raised our hopes by reminding us that we need to be agile and resilient. So he touched base on the fact that we're looking at fourth industrial revolution technologies. Aviation technologies will ensure our future sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a short 10 minutes break. I'm just looking at time. We will take a 10 minutes break. It's 14:50. We will come back in 1500. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to remind our honorable guest speakers to come back for a short panel discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, we can now take a break.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your break. I'd like to, at this moment, invite our panelists, Mr. Lehodi, Mr. Ogochuko, and Dr. Laiska. Now, while we wait, let me remind you to interact with us via the live chat box, where we will then reflect on your questions and comments, and also on social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, using the hashtag Avi Afrique 2021. Mr. Lehodi, I see you are here. Welcome. We are then waiting for Dr. Laiska and then Mr. Ogochuko, so we can start the discussion. We really have seen a tremendous effort in the panelists calling for greater collaboration, but most importantly, we've seen great interactions from our attendees and honorable guests, challenging some of the thought processes and also seeking clarity. And hopefully this discussion will work wonders in ensuring that we deliver the clarity that is required by our guests. Let me rather pose this first question to Dr. Laiska, and it comes from one of our guests who have been following the conversation since we started. They want to know how possible is it, how possible is an industry collapse based on the analysis projection of the current collected data of flights movement, or flight movements, I think they wanted to say. What are the chances of industry surviving something worse than the COVID pandemic?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Doctor.
Thank you for that question. How possible is it for the industry to collapse? I think also, if I can reflect back to my presentation earlier on today, I mentioned how critical a service the aviation sector actually plays to keep the world going. And if you recall, I had a banner across the entire value chain on what feeds the aviation sector in terms of the business travel, in terms of traveling for purposes of medical attention, sustaining your knowledge through knowledge sharing and knowledge generation by travel. So the question around industry collapse, like with any critical application, critical as in we cannot do without it, I personally do not foresee an industry collapse. With the COVID pandemic, what we have seen are challenges within industries. We have seen segments that tried to pick up but couldn't. But we have governments, we have strategic alliances that have helped to bail out those services that are seen as critical for a nation. So in terms of looking at the data, in fact, to say the projections for the negative impact on the aviation sector for 2020, the projections were actually much higher than what we saw, because as soon as borders opened, travel was permitted, people did get back on flights. So the demand will be there. I did mention, though, that we need to mitigate for a slump in market demand, but not necessarily that it's going to disappear because of the critical service that the sector provides. In terms of surviving another pandemic, I believe that COVID-19 pandemic has been something the world has learned from or is learning from. So we are hopefully going to learn from our mistakes, apply our successes in the future. Yes, hope I get that.
Thank you, Dr. Lesko. And you cannot necessarily delve in this discussion without linking it to the economy and how that economy performs. All economies across the world have suffered a tremendous impact because of the pandemic. Something we also heard Mr. Lahodi highlight in his presentation to say that it would be important as we recover that governments, particularly in the region, opened up and started thinking differently, which brings me to my next question that would possibly go to Mr. Lahodi as well. That would you then suggest that discouraging an inward-focused approach to infrastructure development on the continent by ANSPs, and of course being cognizant of sovereign aspirations as well, could be a necessary step to post-COVID-19 economic recovery and to get the economy going?
Thank you, Program Director, for your question. And before I even delve into the details, I will remind you of the ICAO approach. As I've emphasized the importance of our multilateral bodies, ICAO has developed a program called Aviation System Block Upgrade, where it says no country left behind. And within that context, all it says is for us to be able to achieve a smooth transition into the future, we need collaboration as far as infrastructure is concerned. And the most emphasis there is how do we then ensure that as we plan, whether as a block or as a region, we don't leave any other player in the region behind. And I think the important aspect to pick up from there is that the intergovernmental relations within the region needs to be emphasized. We need to move forward in such a way that when we see such opportunities where there's opportunities to collaborate, we take them up. And what I didn't emphasize on the presentation is from an infrastructure point of view. Remember, I spoke about the disruptions and the unpredictable aspect. And it goes without doubt that at this point, our industry has been far more unpredictable than ever before. And I've spoke about the dynamic strategies. So at this point, we then see it with where whatever that we have now may seem to be a plan. However, as the dynamic nature of the setup changes, you may see it with a completely different plan. And I think in full support, we already have that type of structure. The most important thing is to embrace some of those programs moving forward through our government within the region. Thanks.
Would you think that Kenzo is driving this conversation and also encouraging this type of collaboration, Mr. Lahodi?
Of course, you would recall within the Kenzo setup, we have a number of programs, one of them being the peer review mechanisms and other peer mechanisms in the region. And as a regional body that is bringing all the NSPs together in the region, I also emphasize the inter-industry body relationship, that as you plan your navigation service planning infrastructure, you also have to look on the airport side, because in our setup in the continent, we still sit with entities that are still in their own nature, ANSPs and airports. So as much as in our setup, we're able to separate ANSP infrastructure building in airport, in other part of the continent, we still see this with this as almost like a one entity. So the likes of Kenzo, ACI, IATA are playing a very critical role. In the past months, we have been engaged in sessions with these industry bodies in themes that are already talking about restarting the aviation industry. So the likes of Kenzo, ACI, IATA, and other regional bodies in the continent will assist us in recovering and building a unified future for the industry.
Thanks, Mr. Lahodi. I'll then hand over to my co-host, Nokwanda, for the next questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Komozo. Am I audible? Thank you. Okay, thank you, Homoto. The next question is for Mr. Ogochuko. Mr. Ogochuko, I do recall in your presentation that you told us that we should be resilient, we should be agile, we should be able to forge through in this 2020 pandemic. You also touched based on technologies, you touched based on the people skill set that we need to develop and training procedures. Yeah, it was a very impressive presentation indeed, Mr. Ogochuko. The question is from Sibusiso Habile. He says, Mr. Ogochuko, change waits for no one. How then do we become agile through those enablers? You have summarized well some of the barriers, however, key to dealing with them is funding or lack of it. How do ANSPs, mostly in Africa, become agile and keep up with change while operating on reduced revenues and budgets? I hope the question is loud and clear, Mr. Ogochuko.
Yeah, thank you very much on that. Very good question, basically. And I'm going to start from the issue of change of mindsets. The current operational environment for NSPs, basically globally and in Africa, particularly, has to do with issue of ownership structure. I mean, that's very critical. Now, it starts from there. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, the type of ownership structure and management structure actually defines the next steps towards agility. Now, number one, the ownership structure we're looking at now, is it government owned, or is it private entity owned, or is it a mix of both? That ownership structure and the management that comes up from there will determine whether you're going to be competitive or agile. I mean, we'll give an example with Ethiopian Airlines. It's actually a government entity body. It's actually corporatized. The government does not get involved, itself involved in running Ethiopian Airlines. It doesn't. So they can be nimble and agile because they can take decisions quickly and rapidly without recourse to the government, bureaucracy of government. So it gives them that flexibility to be able to actually to pivot, make decisions, change, and all of that. So it starts from being able to have that understanding that the business model for NSPs needs to change when it comes to the ownership structure. It needs to change. The government needs to divest from owning NSPs, divest from it, and allow private sector to get involved in running NSPs. Now, it can be a partnership between both. I'll give an example. The UK NATS is private sector owned. UK NATS is like ATNS or NAMA and all. It's private sector owned. And there are a couple of NSPs like that owned by private sector organizations in Europe and America and all of that. So North America and things like that. So we need to begin to think towards that. I talked about changing our perception and mindset about ownership and structure. Issue of sovereignty. Somebody mentioned issue of sovereignty and all that, safety and security. And I talked about the issue of space-based ADSB. It's a private entity that runs it. Airlines is a private entity, even though some NSPs have investments in the area. Again, that's something else that we need to begin to look at SMEs in Africa. We need to begin to invest in our service providers, OEMs. We need to begin to invest in those OEMs so that we can also be able to get revenues from those OEMs as well. So not just buy their service, we actually be able to get revenue from the service they're providing on our behalf to other NSPs as well. So investment approach needs to change as well. It has to change. We need to look at areas where NSP can actually invest in other organizations, even outside the aviation environment. Look, I mentioned the issue of infrastructure. Aviation NSPs have so much infrastructure that is lying idle because of the aviation environment of backups. You have to have primary, secondary, tertiary backups and all of that. Those infrastructure are lying idle. It can be reprovisioned and repurposed to deliver service even outside the industry. I mean, somebody mentioned, I think Nego mentioned about the airport. The NSP is the position to provide telecom services and IT services to the airports, to the airlines, and all of that. That can become non-aeronautical revenue. So within the space of ownership, management structure, the capacity to innovate and taking innovation not as a risk, but something that is part of the culture of the organization, then it gives that flexibility for people, for the organization to be agile and take those critical decisions that will push them forward into remaining sustainable. But in the short run, based on what COVID has done, the government intervention, financial intervention is necessary to help NSPs to actually reboot, so to speak, and begin to deliver services again. Thank you. I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you, Mr. Ogochuko. Thank you, Mr. Ogochuko. Well answered. Well answered. I really like the fact that you're saying that we should change how our mindset and how we invest, how the government invest, our investment strategies. Thank you. Well answered, Mr. Ogochuko. The next question is also, I believe, it will speak to Mr. Ogochuko. Although the future is unpredictable for business to be more resilient, what views can be shared on the use of historic data, e.g. past pandemics, for establishing survival scenarios for business? Or such models don't work perhaps due to time difference, considering that preparedness and readiness can put us as a step ahead in the future? Is the question clear, Mr. Ogochuko?
Absolutely, yeah, it's clear, very clear. Okay, so the COVID-19 is totally different from other kind of health pandemics, basically. Like I mentioned, if you look at the SARS of 2003, it was basically regional. You look at Asia, basically, and all that. You look at Ebola. Ebola was more of West Africa and DRC. So, it was actually sectorial. Look at the MERS, which is the Middle East one of 2012 and all that. It was also basically focused on the Middle East. But COVID-19 transcended beyond regional and all that. It became global in its operation and all that. And part of the challenge for COVID-19 was the fact that aviation became the carrier of COVID-19 because of movement of people from one place to the other before the lockdowns came into picture. So the point here is, in as much as there are trends, I mean, the 1910 influenza and all of that, it was also a health pandemic, but it's different in scope, it's different in operation and all that. I mean, COVID-19 has a lot of variants. It's still mutating. Variants are coming on. So the change is rapid. The change is different. And while we're thinking that, okay, we've actually have a handle on it, suddenly we hear there's a variant. It changes the whole landscape of how that mitigation for COVID-19 can happen. So it's good to look at the past. However, the past must be able to have something to glean from that will affect the present. So those historical data are there, they're good. However, it does not give us the picture of the current reality we're having right now today, which that will enable us so much so to use it to try and figure out how to deal with the issue of COVID-19 today. Because the landscape is changed totally and completely. It's not the same thing. We can apply certain things on there, but we're not able to basically take everything from there. And so those models are there, but models have to be applied to the appropriate environment. Right now, COVID-19 is totally different from previous pandemics and endemics. So the approach, we're actually on a learning curve. We're actually on a learning curve when it comes to COVID-19. We're learning as COVID-19 issues evolve. We're trying to learn and mitigate. So we're actually building fresh historical records now for this kind of global pandemic in case it happens in the future. But in terms of the past, we don't really have any historical thing that will actually apply appropriately for the present situation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ogochuko. Well answered indeed. I will then give a floor to my colleague, Komoto, to take us through the rest of the question and also wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nokwanda, and thank you so much to our panelists. I mean, in not so far ago, about 100 years ago, a carriage that was pulled by horses was the most innovative thing the world could appreciate. Soon thereafter, we went on to see cars with engines becoming the order of the day. And then not so long ago, aviation has taken over as one of those progression in transportation and innovation in that space of transportation. At some point, it took hours to travel from Johannesburg to Cape Town, but today it only takes less than 2 hours to get to Cape Town from Johannesburg. But then we have to be agile, and also through collaboration, we should focus on how the future is going to unfold and be able to adequately prepare. This last question goes to all the panelists, and maybe we can start with Dr. Laisko, followed up by Mr. Lhodi, and then wrap it up with Mr. Ogochuko. In real terms, what is the current level of Pan-African collaboration in matters aviation related? And are we yet geared to have a coherent response to another disruptor, even like COVID-19? If not, where do we start the shift? Are we going to see ourselves being air taxied by Skyhawk, or is that going to be something that comes through Africa? Is Uber going to take the air car or the airborne car industry and make it happen in Africa, or are we geared up to do it ourselves? To all the panelists.
Thank you. So if I can probably start with where we are. I mentioned earlier on about the single African air transport market that was introduced. So far, as I understand, there's 26 countries that have signed up, and hopefully we would have more out of the 54 countries in Africa signing up, coming on board. Then the other aspect we also looked at was visa liberalization. And I think only 14 out of the 54 countries currently offer visas upon arrival to African nationals. So we have to realize, and I emphasized it before, that visa openness actually underpins the continent's tourism sector, and it actually can create many more skilled jobs. So with increased tourism, you get a rise in new business opportunities in transport, hotels, shopping malls, and restaurants. And then for the number of African youth that are currently unemployed, this would mean a new job market. So for our existing policies, and we have very good policies here in South Africa and across the continent, and we need to fast track the implementation of that. In terms of the technologies, we need to be ready for it. If we think about when the first airplane came into existence for commercial flights or to South Africa, we obviously had to have training in using that. So there was a time waste before we could take to market in South Africa. Now, if we look at all of the other disrupting technologies that you have mentioned, here too, in order for us to be ready, we should have started a while back. The UAVs has an enormous potential for the transportation sector in the country. And if we continue fumbling about, getting the wording correct or stepping on toes, and pardon my boldness in this, stepping on toes in terms of policy and in terms of regulatory hurdles, we will stifle the innovation. Of course, we must be wary of the safety measures that would come hand in hand. But innovation in safety measures, in regulation, is part of the entire chain. So we have to be open to thinking. We need to be agile, as also mentioned earlier, and we have to be bold. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laisko. Your take, Mr. Lhodi?
Thank you very much, Program Director. I'm going to pick up on where Dr. Laisko left off, especially on the policy aspect. Is that we do have the policies, but what is lacking at the moment is your, let me call it your continent-wide policy programs. The likes of your single air transport market, African continental free trade are more of your regional initiatives. However, they are not necessarily supported and linked up at a regional policy level, which is why it takes time to then you'll have member states embracing a structure or a program. However, when you go to the state, that is not a state policy, and then it takes time to implement. We have play around the idea of a single sky from an infrastructure point of view, similar skies, that type of setup. But again, in the absence of a unified continental or regional policy, you still sit with that very, very big challenge. Again, I spoke about the inter-industry regional body collaboration. Because of the setup in our continent, where you still sit with a CAA being an NSP and being an airport. From a planning point of view, you then still sit with, should I call it, conflicting priorities. Whereas if you go on a setup in our own industry setups, let's say council, you sit with NSPs, you do an NSP plan from a policy point of view. However, at the same time, you sit with a party that at home is also a CAA and an airport. But you don't consider some of those elements. And I think until we then are able to bring in those inter-industry regional bodies into the place so that we can champion some of these programs, including infrastructure. And at the continental level, those regional policies that are able to say, as soon as we embrace a system or a policy or framework, it then becomes regionalized as a policy, and implementation then becomes easier. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think well put. I mean, from a Pan-African viewpoint, that's exactly what's needed. Dr. Ogochuko, in closing, your remarks, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. Okay, so just to continue where my two other speakers have stopped at, I just want to say first and foremost, again, I'm going to underscore that it's an issue of mindset of the African leadership. Presidents, heads of state and all that, issue of mindset. There's an issue of this sovereignty approach, states, country approach, rather than have an embracing regional approach to issues. So these policies are there from the AU level, but it's not been domesticated in member states. It's not. So how can you implement a policy that you've naturally domesticated in your country? It's not going to happen. Okay, so it's that change of mindset from the leaders, because each president wants to operate on a silo and keep what they think they have, which doesn't make sense anyways, because the more you come together, the stronger you are in terms of collaboration and partnerships and all that. But the African mentality it's so at variance with progressive mindset in terms of leadership and all of that, and that has to change. So no matter how much technocrats and strategies and all that come together and develop policies for Africa, as long as the presidents of countries do not support it, it's not going to work. Because that's where the issue for me is. We have wonderful policies and all of that across the region, but it can only be implemented when the presidents are the ones driving it. Just like an organization. If an MD of a company does not buy into what you're talking about, that is not going to sell. It won't work in organization. But if the MD buys it, it becomes the driver of that process. And when the MD becomes the driver of that process, the thing must surely work in the organization. So same thing with Africa as a region, with each of the member states. The presidents need to take absolute control and leadership and to say, look, we're doing this, we're championing it, we're going to go ahead with it. Everybody will fall in line in each of those countries. And we will not have a cohesive African policy that's being implemented for the benefit of Africa, basically. Now, if there's fear, then let's do the agile method, do iterations. Start with small aspects of all of those policies and try it out and see whether it's going to work or not. Look at the values and benefits you get from those iterations and keep doing it until you're able to do the complete whole. So we can start from there. Let's apply agility to this policy implementation across Africa and begin to see the value that it brings to Africa. Maybe when that value, we begin to see those small values, incremental values that come, their mindset will begin to change. I said, look, we're actually coming too late, like Dr. Lesko said earlier, we're coming too late. And begin to now help to fast track and accelerate this change so that Africa can become, a unique aviation environment that the global aviation will actually look at and say, yes, Africa actually doing what is right. Technology is there. Let's embrace the technology. For example, okay, look, ASECNA is 17 countries. 70 countries, and they're single NSP of 70 countries. So why can't the rest of the 34 countries in Africa actually come together with ASECNA and form an African NSP integrated. Why can't that happen? That should happen. We already have an example of 17 countries coming together as an NSP. So why can't other countries come together with ASECNA and develop an African integrated NSP environment? And that can happen. There's an example already with ASECNA. So again, it's an issue of understanding, issue of leadership, issue of holding back basically from various African countries and all that. So if ASECNA can do it, let's spread it across the whole of Africa. And I think AU needs to do something about this and ensure that all of these beautiful policies, SATEM, Yamoussoukro Accord needs to work in Africa. Why should I fly to Niger from Nigeria? I have to go to Europe first. Go to Europe first and come back to Niger, which is just across the border. It doesn't make sense. So we need to change all of those scenarios in Africa, ensure that Africa, we develop routes in Africa that we can travel from one country to Africa without any issue. Dr. Lesko mentioned the fact that these countries have signed the SATEM, of course, visa things for them, but they're not implemented, even though they've signed, but they're not implementing it in their countries. It's not happening yet. So what's the point of the signatures when in reality, like Moledi said, they're not implementing these things. So we should walk the talk. We should walk the talk and walk the talk. When we say, let's do it. So Africa needs to move forward, and Africa needs to embrace technology and look inward, because there are so many innovations happening in Africa, even outside aviation, that will support aviation. Let the aviation environment begin to look at those innovations and then bring it to aviation, apply it to aviation in Africa, rather than we buy in solutions. Let's develop our own solutions within Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ogochuko, and thank you so much to our panelists. For me personally, if we all open doors to collaboration and we not limit any ideas flowing, innovation is a possibility. And tomorrow, I might be able to jump into my UAM and fly to Pretoria instead of sitting on the highway in traffic and congestion. I can't wait for those possibilities to be realized by this continent. And only if we hold hands is it possible. Thank you so much for your contribution. We really appreciate it. We will stay in touch and we'll continue our discussions around innovation with you as industry leaders so that we can gain more and more improvement and preparation for the future. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you.
Valued guests, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our program, or rather almost to the end of it. Let me at this time call upon the Executive ATM CNS Planning and Standards, and also the Chief Air Traffic Services in ATNS to give us a closing address. Mr. Jeffrey Machoba, the platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. The Avi Afrique has been the flagship for quite some time now. We're starting to lose count of the years since Avi Afrique started. So the summit managed to create an environment and the platform for learning, collaboration, and innovation for quite some time. So companies, individuals, they have benefited from the summit in different ways. Some they managed to create network. Some managed to collaborate outside the summit. And really that's the intention of the summit. The summit is not only to benefit ATNS, but the summit is there to benefit all involved, even outside aviation itself. So it is termed Avi Afrique for a good reason. It's not just Avi Afrique because it was just a nice name that we found. It's for Africa, where we're discussing African problems and coming up with African solutions. I like what Mr. Ogochuko has indicated about addressing African challenges. So listening to him is very passionate about fixing Africa. So the summit, as we all know, it started yesterday with a very packed program which focused on data management and cybersecurity from our own Sivuise as well as Mr. Mana. We were also stimulated by Mr. Managa when he was talking about the stimulating innovation. And obviously we had a panel discussions around those. Our own Sivuise, he only joined this year. When he started talking about data management, I think my colleagues within ATNS, they will tell you that we all listen because he's so passionate about data management. And the reason why I'm singling that out is because this is the future, colleagues. Data management it's the future. You need to use data to make decisions. You need data to predict the future. And if you analyze data in a correct way, I don't think you will go any wrong. So and it was evident from the amount and type of questions raised by the floor yesterday on these three very, very critical points: the stimulating innovation, data management, as well as cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, Mr. Mana, it's something that it concerns everyone. But I think coming out of yesterday's discussion, we are better informed, and we should learn more on how to deal with issues of cyber attacks. Day two, colleagues, was equally very, very informative. We had vibrant and energetic young men as well as a young lady dealing with issues of strategic collaboration and partnership from Dr. Loisko and the future environment by our very own Mabitsi Lekhodu. So thank you very much, colleagues. Mr. Chuku, on agility, I like how you describe agility. Very, very interesting. I'm very interested in the issue of ownership of the NSP, especially within the African continent. Mr. Ogochuko, we're going to invite you to the African Civil Aviation Commission meeting, because this is where the subject it's been discussed, and you need to assist the politicians to understand that the issue of a single African market, the issue of a single NSP within the African continent, it's not going to take away your sovereignty. So this sovereignty approach, as opposed to regional approach, as we have nicely put it, it should be something of the past. We need to be looking at collaboration. I like this phrase where they say collaborate instead of competition, and it ties nicely with this African phrase where you say, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So the 2022 Avi Afrique will drill deeper into this issue of data management and digitization in a collaborative environment, colleagues. The date of the Avi Afrique 2022 will be announced as early as next year. So may I take this opportunity, colleagues, to thank the ATNS chairman, the ATNS board under the leadership of Mr. Tobela, the ATNS management, that is the executive, the senior management, as well as the entire management, under the leadership of Mr. Sangweni, for allowing us to host this very important summit under the current environment. It's very challenging. You experienced yourself yesterday, technical issues there and there. But all in all, it went very, very well. In actual fact, this is when you need to be innovative as a business if you want to survive. So in the new normal, you need to be more innovative. Thank you very much to the local organizing committee under the leadership of Lisa Tele. The content was rich and relevant thanks to the team that has put this together. Well done for putting together the 2021 Avi Afrique Summit colleagues. This is much appreciated. And to our two MCs, Komoto Molifi and Nokwanda, not only beautiful and handsome, but also a lot of wisdom that was displayed when they analyze and interrogate the topic themselves. Well done, folks. And I can only say the sky is the limit. Colleagues, see you all in 2022, either virtually or in persons. We cannot predict the future. As we say, you need to give us more data to be able to understand whether we'll host Avi Afrique virtually or on site. Thank you very much, colleagues. The Avi Afrique Summit 2021 has come to an end. Thank you very much.